The Da Vinci Code might be fiction, but deep beneath the Vatican, some whisper of a genuine secret just as threatening, concealed in hushed hallways and behind thick iron gates. Banned writings and hidden sketches lie in darkness, protected as though they might rewrite the narrative of belief itself. Tonight we tread carefully through those shadows where artistic expression and enigma converge and where reality hides within the folds of the past. If you find yourself drawn to mysteries like this one, remember to subscribe for more. Now get comfortable, let your eyes close, and allow the tale to begin. The Da Vinci Code was far more than a simple novel. It served as a catalyst that ignited curiosity around the globe. For countless readers, it marked their first encounter with concepts that wove together religion, artistic masterpieces, and concealed chronicles into one sprawling, intricate puzzle. Readers turned those pages deep into the hours of darkness, captivated by the notion that something so ancient and revered might still harbour untold truths. Some dismissed it as pure entertainment, a skillfully crafted narrative designed to captivate. Others experienced an uncomfortable pull, as though certain elements might touch closer to reality than most would acknowledge. When it initially emerged, the excitement of discovery was palpable. Every passage seemed to draw readers further into concealed chambers, forgotten archives, and clandestine organisations whose identities echoed like a barely remembered hymn. People started viewing familiar masterpieces through a different lens. A canvas was no longer merely pigment and fabric. A cathedral was no longer simply a sanctuary for devotion. There might be meanings in the architecture, hidden messages in the artistic techniques, and a chronicle that had been deliberately constructed to obscure certain truths. In private spaces of cafes and midnight conversations, voices dropped to whispers about the Vatican. They envisioned its underground chambers filled with age-old manuscripts that might upend the narratives handed down through generations. The story alluded to this without attempting to expose everything, and that quality perhaps gave it greater power. It didn't require validation of every claim. It simply needed to spark wonder about what might rest in the obscurity. Through the years, fascination intensified. Scholars were prompt to challenge the novel's assertions, identifying mistakes and fabrications threaded throughout the narrative. Still, even these refutations couldn't eliminate the impression it created. Once the notion takes hold that history may be more complex than presented, it proves difficult to abandon. The Vatican itself seldom addressed the story directly. There were occasional statements, courteous yet resolute, cautioning believers that entertainment shouldn't be mistaken for fact. Then those grand stone entrances sealed once more, and quietness prevailed. That quietness was potentially the most significant response of all. In an era that responds instantly to every speculation, choosing to remain so reserved becomes its own form of declaration. Tonight we start not by confirming or refuting, but by observing. We'll move gradually into the realm the narrative influenced, tracing the impression it made. We'll position ourselves in the crisp atmosphere of ancient passages, detect the subtle resonance of steps from ages gone by, and permit the uncertainties to emerge like flame glow in a shadowed space. Some resolutions may be evident, others may remain concealed, but the exploration into the centre of these enigmas starts now. With a murmur in the dimness that continues to resonate, the Da Vinci Code didn't make a subtle entrance. From its first appearance in bookstores, it seemed to travel from reader to reader through homes, public transit, and peaceful bedrooms where lights remained burning well past the midnight hour. It transformed into something beyond a narrative. It evolved into a collective phenomenon, a sudden surge of discussion about artistic expression, spiritual systems, and the concealed passages of human chronicles. For numerous individuals, it represented their initial vision of the Vatican as something beyond a remote location of marble chambers and elaborate rituals. The novel positioned it as a venue for hidden knowledge. The book's content intertwined artworks, ecclesiastical customs, and destinations that anyone might explore. Yet it presented them through a perspective that seemed completely fresh. It proposed that the world's most celebrated masterpieces might contain communications intended for observers who understood how to interpret them. It implied that history might not be fixed and immutable, but encoded in a cipher awaiting decryption. Even for those who questioned its validity, there existed a peculiar satisfaction in contemplating the pursuit, the methodical revelation of evidence that might lead somewhere transformative. What granted the narrative its influence was its position in the uncertain territory between reality and invention. Identities of actual creators, actual sanctuaries, and actual documents were merged with fictional scenarios. That delicate boundary left minds unsettled. If certain aspects were factual, might other components also hold truth? The concept established itself not through heated arguments, but in silent personal considerations that surfaced when surroundings grew still and consciousness was permitted to drift. In metropolitan centres worldwide, guides started identifying elements in canvases and sculptures that observers had previously overlooked. In Rome, the concept of secret spaces below the Vatican appeared less fantastical and more like an enigma awaiting the appropriate discoverers. And despite expert clarifications, they couldn't make the questions vanish. The book had achieved its purpose. It had revealed an opening that couldn't be sealed again. This explains why the Vatican's acknowledgement was so concise and measured. There were no extended addresses, no comprehensive counter-arguments, merely a handful of deliberate phrases to assure the faithful that it was fictional work. Then the matter was dismissed, at least publicly. That restraint seemed to create an empty area, and into that area flooded innumerable speculations, each one adding another strand to the expanding network of mystery. As we pursue this direction, we're not seeking a singular solution. We're entering a terrain where the revealed and the unrevealed coexist. The reality may not be positioned where we anticipate finding it, but the exploration itself will lead us further into the essence of chronicles, into shadows, where the atmosphere carries the burden of ages. Tonight, we'll start listening to what the quietness attempts to communicate. The Vatican isn't an institution that frequently speaks without purpose. When it chooses to, every phrase is considered, evaluated, and crafted to convey specific significance. So when the Da Vinci Code started stirring public fascination, the Church's limited acknowledgements were like small stones released into a profound, motionless body of water. There were formal comments from particular authorities carefully reminding audiences that the book was entertainment, that it combined fact with fabrication in manners that might confuse the devoted. But beyond those quick declarations, there was minimal addition. No prolonged discussions, no itemized systematic refutations. Simply a closure of the massive stone barriers and a resumption of the peaceful cadence of routine existence in the city-state. That quietness transformed into its own form of communication. In an environment where every speculation receives immediate commentary, the decision to articulate almost nothing appeared unusual. Some interpreted it as evidence that the Church preferred not to amplify the narrative's attention. Others suspected it reflected something more profound, a silent protection of a chronicle that shouldn't be scrutinized too intensely. For ages, the Vatican has served as both the protector of faith and the custodian of its own records, a location where every manuscript, correspondence, and historical document has justification to be maintained or hidden. It's a metropolis of tradition and brightness, on stone surfaces, but simultaneously a maze of secured chambers where the atmosphere holds the scent of aged parchment and burning wax. It's this double character, accessible and restricted, that caused the quietness surrounding the Da Vinci Code to resemble a veil rather than a barrier. You couldn't observe what existed beyond it, but you could detect there was something present. Inside the city, existence continued as it perpetually had. Worshippers traversed St. Peter's Square. Chimes sounded throughout the skyline. The Pope offered benedictions from the elevated position. Yet beyond the visible areas were the silent passages where record keepers moved with access devices in their possession, and where particular chambers remained sealed regardless of how frequently they were encountered. It's within these invisible sections that the uncertainties from the book appear to establish themselves. Might there be documentation or relics associated with the concepts in the narrative? Might there be papers that could alter how individuals comprehended their beliefs? The Vatican's unwillingness to address such scenarios left the entrance completely available for speculation to explore. The lack of a response differs from a refusal. In the stillness, the enigma only deepens, and in a location where the structures themselves appear to preserve recollections, the quietness becomes integrated into the chronicle, influencing how it's retained and how it's conveyed. Tonight, we advance further into that quietness, attending not to what gets expressed, but to what has been deliberately left unspoken. There's something regarding the attraction of prohibited understanding that has accompanied humanity throughout every era, from the earliest legends to the most protected governmental mysteries. There has perpetually been an aspect of us that gravitates toward what we're instructed not to observe. The Da Vinci Code touched this dimension of consciousness, not through bold declarations, but through suggestions. It indicated that the realities concealed behind Vatican barriers might be not exclusively spiritual in character, but additionally human, intimate, and fundamentally linked to the foundations of chronicles. It's an established sequence. When understanding gets secured away, it starts to accumulate significance in the mind. A locked chamber represents more than simply an area with an entrance. It evolves into a representation. The very gesture of concealing something indicates that it holds importance. And the Vatican, with its ages of custom, ceremonies and protected records, is potentially the most lasting symbol of this form of discretion. Throughout time, individuals have challenged expulsion, even their existence, to pursue the prohibited. Historical intellectuals duplicated texts in concealment. Voyagers returned from distant locations with artifacts and charts they could exclusively reveal to a select trusted handful. Creators like Leonardo himself are thought to have concealed concepts in their creations, potentially recognizing that communicating too directly might invite peril. The notion that the Church might withhold particular writings or artifacts isn't novel, but the Da Vinci Code positioned it in the contemporary era, causing the enigma to feel vital once more. The Vatican has perpetually navigated a delicate course. It carries the obligation of maintaining faith for exceeding 1 billion individuals, but it simultaneously possesses the chronicle of that faith in its most fragile and intricate manifestation. There are accounts in those records that might motivate or disturb, depending on who examines them, and therefore, across the ages, determinations have been reached about what to distribute and what to preserve. Secured away in the silence of a stone passage, with the subtle aroma of ritual fragrance remaining in the atmosphere, it's not challenging to envision an entrance at the terminus that exclusively a limited number can access. Inside, potentially, there's a container sealed for ages, or a text enclosed in fabric to shield it from illumination. No noise emerges from inside, yet the existence of what's concealed appears to occupy the chamber. This represents the essence of the fascination. It's not exclusively about revealing information, but about entering an area where chronicles feel vital and unreachable, where every shadow might be concealing a reality long withheld from humanity. Tonight, we pursue that sensation, permitting it to direct us further into the areas where illumination and obscurity meets, and where the division between legend and chronicle is as delicate as the border of a sheet. St. Peter's Square possesses two aspects. During daylight, it's occupied with sounds and movement, the shuffling of tourists capturing images and the pleasant aroma of sunshine on rock. During nighttime, it transforms into something completely different. When the final tour groups depart and the security personnel secure the entrances, The vast open area descends into a tranquility that feels more ancient than the metropolis. Surrounding it, the atmosphere becomes cooler. The stone underfoot retains the day's warmth, but the darkness extends far throughout the surfaces. At the focal point stands the historical obelisk transported from distant Egypt ages ago, its silent exterior observing the square as it has for lifetimes. The water features murmur as they release water into the receptacles, the noise resonating gently against the curved extensions of Bernini's colonnade. The pillars themselves appear to position like silent guardians, their darkness extending toward the basilica. From this location, the vast dome of St. Peter's ascends against the horizon, its outline a dark summit above the metropolis. Inside the basilica, the precious metal and stone illuminate under reduced lighting. But below the refined surfaces exists another realm completely, a location that most tourists will never witness. There are burial chambers, corridors and chambers that have been sealed for hundreds of years. The atmosphere there remains motionless, dense with the aroma of rock and time. It's in such instances of silence that the mind can explore. You might contemplate what exists beneath, of the burial sites of pontiffs, and the fragments of historical Rome still buried under strata of belief. You might contemplate a secured entrance in some peripheral hallway, an entrance with no marking, one that exclusively a limited quantity of access devices can open. Beyond it might be a collection of texts, the pigment diminished but still readable, or a storage containing an item whose account could modify how we perceive the history. In the stillness of the square during night time, the Vatican feels less like a communal structure and more like a breathing recollection. The surfaces appear to retain each movement, each murmur of a discussion conducted distant from the attention of the masses. Every shadow feels like a beckoning not to rush toward it, but to pause, to examine more carefully, to attend for something almost too subtle to detect. If the Da Vinci Code revealed an entrance in consciousness, then nights such as this create the opportunity to traverse through it. The realm outside the barriers rests, but within, the burden of chronicles never settles. Somewhere in the obscurity beyond the magnificent exteriors and the sealed gates, the mysteries remain as patient as the surfaces that protect them. Tonight we'll start to advance closer to those concealed locations, pursuing the course where chronicles and enigma converge. Below the illuminated sky, the account of the Priory of Sion is among those threads that the Da Vinci Code integrated thoroughly into its narrative. A designation that appeared both historical and enigmatic. In the book, it was depicted as a clandestine organisation protecting realities that might disturb the pillars of the church itself. Numerous readers presumed it must be genuine, and in a manner it exists, but not in the manner the narrative indicated. The designation initially surfaced in the mid-1900s connected to papers that emerged in France. These records, recognised as the dossier's secrets, enumerated a lengthy succession of supreme leaders including identities like Leonardo da Vinci and Sir Isaac Newton. The suggestion was that this organisation had been discreetly influencing chronicles for ages, protecting a mystery about the ancestry of Jesus. The papers were deposited in the French National Library, granting them a perception of authenticity that captured the interest of scholars and inquisitive minds similarly. But when investigators examined more closely, they started to observe flaws in the account. The priory as characterised didn't appear to exist prior to the 1950s. The documentation indicated to an individual named Pierre Plantard, who subsequently acknowledged much of the account, was a construction part reality and part fabrication. Still, the legend had already established itself, and legends aren't easily eliminated once established for the Vatican. The priory's account may have been simply another in a lengthy succession of legends. But it possessed a threatening edge. Even a fabricated group can generate uncertainties, or when connected to the concept of concealed realities. The indication that Leonardo himself might have been engaged granted the legend a captivating element. Artistic expression and discretion have perpetually created a powerful combination, especially when connected to the distinguished identities of chronicles. Moving through the Vatican's own chambers, it's simple to comprehend why such an account could persist. The construction itself feels like a cipher, with representations carved into upper surfaces, mosaics conveying stratified accounts and canvases whose interpretations transform depending on who observes. Whether or not the priory ever existed in the manner it was characterized, it signifies something eternal. The conviction that there are individuals somewhere who possess more understanding than they're prepared to articulate, and therefore the priory remains a spectre, a designation that moves between reality and entertainment. In the stillness of the darkness, when the Vatican's passages are vacant and the resonances of movements dissolve into quietness, the consideration of such an organization becomes almost physical. You can envision them moving through those identical areas ages ago, possessing understanding that had to be concealed until the appropriate instant. Whether they were genuine or simply envisioned, their shadow persists over the account we're pursuing. It's one additional reminder that in the realm of chronicles and enigma, sometimes the uncertainty itself possesses more influence than the resolution. Tonight, we maintain that uncertainty close as we take our subsequent silent advances into the more profound passages of this account. The concept of an ancestry descending from Jesus has stimulated the mind for ages. Though it was the Da Vinci Code that transported it into households and hushed discussions throughout the globe, the book indicated that Mary Magdalene was not merely a devotee, but a spouse, and that collectively they produced offspring whose successors still existed among us. It was an audacious assertion enclosed in the terminology of chronicles and artistic expression, and it troubled many who had exclusively recognized the account conveyed from pulpits in the novel. This ancestry was not simply a component of genealogical chronicle, it was the center of an ages-old conflict between those who attempted to maintain the reality and those who labored to keep it concealed. The speculation asserted that the Vatican, above everything, possessed justification to suppress such understanding, for it would oppose the pillars of the Church's power. In actuality, the concept of an ancestry has profound foundations in legend and historical writings. Some of these accounts originated during periods when the Church was already encountering opposition to its authority, and such narratives could be utilized to generate uncertainty about its teachings. Yet scholars have discovered no substantial verification. There are portions, identities in age genealogies, canvases that appear to indicate proximity between Jesus and Mary Magdalene, representations carved into sanctuaries in France. But these components have never established a comprehensive and definite image for the Vatican. Such assertions are frequently regarded as diversions from belief, matters that pertain to conjecture rather than doctrine. Yet the quietness that pursues such dismissal can appear peculiar. It creates an area for the mind to develop, for speculations to intensify. If there's no reality to the concept, why not communicate extensively and resolve it? Instead, the topic is silently dismissed, as though granting it excessive attention might assist it to establish itself. There's something captivating in the human aspiration to trace a succession from the remote history to the current. 2. To consider that somewhere, someone might possess the ancestry of a figure who influenced the globe's belief is a consideration dense with significance. It makes chronicles intimate. It transforms the account from something in the sheets of scripture into a breathing thread that extends through the ages. In the silent chambers of the Vatican, with flame illumination flickering against historical rock, one can envision the burden such a reality would possess if it were ever validated. Whether it's legend or actuality, the concept has persisted far more extensive than most accounts of its nature. It persists because it poses an uncertainty that touches both chronicles and the essence. Tonight, we possess that uncertainty forward, recognizing that sometimes the influence of a mystery exists not in its verification, but in the likelihood that it might be genuine. The Holy Grail is a designation that has traversed through ages of legendary, yet what it genuinely represents depends on who you question. For some, it's the vessel Jesus utilized during the Last Supper, a sacred container that possesses the influence of divine blessing. For others, it's not an item at all, but a concept, a representation of supreme wisdom or a concealed reality that might alter the direction of chronicles. The Da Vinci Code presented another likelihood, that the Grail was not a vessel, but an individual, Mary Magdalene herself, possessing the ancestry of Jesus. This interpretation was not created by the book, though it was made celebrated by it. Long prior to its sheets were examined, poets, scholars, and religious thinkers had discussed the Grail's character. In historical Europe, accounts of warriors on pursuits occupied the minds of those who believed that discovering the Grail signified reaching the essence of belief itself. These narratives were conveyed in fortresses by firelight, inscribed into decorated texts, and transmitted from one lifetime to the subsequent. Across time, the representation of the Grail transformed. It progressed from being a physical artifact to something less physical, a purpose one might pursue in consciousness rather than in possession. In this perception, the Grail evolved into a reflection, projecting whatever the pursuer most aspired: perpetual existence, sacred understanding, or divine linkage. The concept that it might additionally be a concealed ancestry was merely the most recent in a lengthy succession of interpretations. The Vatican possesses artifacts that it asserts are connected to the existence of Christ, and among them are vessels believed by some to be the genuine vessel of the Last Supper. Yet even within, there's no certainty, exclusively custom. The Church has never completely accepted the more representative or human interpretations of the Grail, potentially because these redirect the concentration away from sacred ceremony and toward accounts that are more challenging to regulate. In the silence of the Vatican's collection, where containers illuminate in the dim illumination, it's simple to envision that somewhere in these chambers exists an item that might be designated the Grail, whether or not it's genuinely the one from legend. Potentially, it's a modest vessel with ages of devotions attached to it. Or potentially, it's something far more unusual, secured away in a storage and forgotten by everyone but a limited number. The enigma of the Grail persists because it's more than an object. It's a pursuit, one that possesses no singular resolution. In this manner, it reflects our exploration through the shadows of chronicles, where information and belief intertwine together and guide us further into locations where exclusively the patient will discover what they pursue tonight. As we progress forward, the Grail evolves not a final terminus, but a companion on the journey, a reminder that the most valuable treasures may be the ones concealed in obvious visibility. Leonardo da Vinci's designation moves through the passages of chronicles like a subtle aroma of pigment and parchment. Most retain him for the Last Supper, for the Mona Lisa, and for his illustrations of aerial mechanisms, but his existence touched numerous realms beyond artistic expression. In the early 1600s, long following his death, was Rome evolved into the focal point of Catholic authority. Yet during his own existence, Leonardo had additionally traversed its pathways, his consciousness absorbing the strata of rock and chronicles, and potentially preserving away details the globe would never recognize. When Leonardo reached Rome in the year 1518, he was already an individual of standing, recognized for his capability in painting, construction, and physical study. The Vatican, under Pope Leo X, welcomed creators and intellectuals, and Leonardo discovered himself among them. His workspace was positioned in the Belvedere, a location where gardens and collections extended out under the Italian Sunday. From there, one could observe the dome of St. Peter's gradually ascending in the distance, its foundations still being arranged for the vast burden it would one day support. Leonardo's duration in the metropolis was not as celebrated as his earlier years in Florence and Milan. Documentation suggests he was assigned responsibilities that maintained him in the background, construction labour, modest assignments, and investigations for initiatives that may never have been fulfilled. Yet it's in these more peaceful years that enigma sometimes develops. He operated in the identical circles as cardinals and intellectuals, individuals who possessed entrance to the Vatican's assemblages and records. It's not challenging to envision him investigating a text by flame illumination or illustrating an historical artifact before it was secured away once more. There are murmurs that some of his journals, the codices occupied with his reflected written annotations and complex diagrams, possess observations from his duration in Rome that were never made communal. While numerous of these journals are dispersed throughout the globe in exhibitions and individual assemblages, a limited number are speculated to be in the control of the Vatican itself, concealed in the depths of the records. If that's genuine, then what they possess may never be recognized to anyone. Beyond those restricted chambers, traversing the identical courses Leonardo once travelled, one might advance under rock arches that have positioned for ages, detecting the resonance of movements against the barriers. The atmosphere in particular courtyards possesses the subtle aroma of herb and moist rock. In the distance, the chimes of St. Peter's announce the hour. In those instances, it's not challenging to envision Leonardo hesitating illustration book in possession, capturing the configuration of a shadow or the arc of a staircase, perceiving significance where others perceived exclusively rock. His duration in Rome was concise compared to his extensive existence, but potentially it was within that some of his most protected considerations established themselves. Considerations that, like the Vatican's most profound mysteries, remain concealed in the areas between what we recognise and what we're still pursuing for. Artistic expression possesses a manner of communicating in more than one terminology. In Leonardo da Vinci's canvases, every crease of material, every inclination of the head, and every shadow can feel like component of a phrase we don't yet comprehend. For ages, intellectuals have investigated his creation, not exclusively for its aesthetic quality, but for the likelihood that it possesses communications intended for those who recognise how to examine. The Da Vinci Code utilised this concept, indicating that particular representations concealed in obvious visibility might guide to realities long maintained from the globe. Consider the Last Supper. At initial observation, it's an instant of scripture transported to existence. Jesus, surrounded by his devotees in the moment following, he declares that one will deceive him. Yet some perceive more. They indicate to the vacant area at Jesus, correct the figure they believe might be Mary Magdalene. The sequences in the hands and expressions, even the configurations created by the bodies and the tablecloth. Others observe that Leonardo excluded particular customary representations, no vessel, no radiance, and contemplate if that was intentional. Beyond this one canvas, Leonardo's other creations additionally encourage such conjecture. His depictions possess the attention of the observer in a manner that feels almost vital, as though the subject recognises something they'll never articulate. His spiritual assignments frequently possess plants, creatures, and structural elements that possess interpretations. In the terminology of representation, a flower may represent for innocence, a connection for perpetuity, a summit for divine enigma. When assembled collectively, these elements can generate a secondary stratum of narration, one concealed below the exterior. The Vatican itself possesses numerous masterpieces, some of which Leonardo would have witnessed during his duration in Rome. The consideration that he might have acquired elements from these creations or created indications for others to discover in the prospect is a concept that continues to captivate artistic scholars. Some believe that exclusively in particular illumination, or following years of meticulous investigation, can the comprehensive significance of his canvases be disclosed. Traversing through a collection when the entrances are sealed to the communal, the quietness feels dense, as though the canvases themselves are attending. The pigments appear more intense without the disturbance of the masses. In that stillness, it's simple to envision that a brushstroke might be more than painted, that a sequence of shadows might be more than coincidence. Whether Leonardo intended these interpretations, or they're the creation of our own pursuing consciousnesses, the outcome is identical. His artistic expression attracts us into a discussion throughout ages. Potentially that's why his creation feels so connected to the enigmas we're investigating. Like the Vatican's own protected chambers, his canvases appear to welcome us in while maintaining component of the reality just beyond grasp. It's in this area between what we can perceive and what we can exclusively detect that the account continues to develop. The Last Supper has positioned for ages as one of the most investigated canvases in the globe, its pigments diminished, yet its existence undimmed, painted on the barrier of a convent in Milan. It's more delicate than most acknowledge, the original strata damaged by duration, moisture, and even careless restorations. Yet despite its fragile condition, it continues to attract tourists from throughout the globe, each one seeking something. Aesthetic quality, chronicles, or potentially the concealed significance they've detected murmured about in publications and motion pictures. The Da Vinci Code granted this masterwork a fresh stratum of celebrity, or potentially disgrace. It asserted that the figure to the correct of Jesus was not the Apostle John, as custom instructs, but Mary Magdalene herself. To substantiate this, it indicated to the gentle, almost feminine characteristics of the figure, the lack of facial hair, and the manner the two focal figures appear to establish a broad V configuration between them, a representation some interpret as the feminine. Scholars have disputed over these concepts. Numerous state that the youthful, clean-shaven expression is a customary manner of depicting John, who was believed to be the youngest devotee. They observe that the absent vessel, another element frequently raised, isn't genuinely absent at all, for the complete surface may be perceived as the platform of communion. Yet others believe that Leonardo's selections were intentional, component of a visual terminology that allude at an account beyond the formal one. The reality may be that Leonardo painted strata of significance into his creation, some intended to be comprehended by the observer, others recognized exclusively to himself. He was, following all, an individual captivated by ciphers, sequences, and the interaction between knowledge and artistic expression. If he desired to incorporate a mystery in his canvas, he possessed both the capability and the subtlety to accomplish so. Positioning before the mural, you can experience its magnitude in a manner no reproduction can capture. The existence-sized figures appear prepared to operate, their expressions frozen at the elevation of tension. The illumination in the chamber is gentle, filtered to shield the pigment, and the atmosphere feels motionless, as though even respiration might disturb the scene. In that stillness, the consciousness starts to observe small aspects. A hand resting precisely so, a shadow descending in a peculiar manner, the subtle indication of a sequence in the creases of a garment. Whether or not Leonardo intended to conceal a communication, the Last Supper has evolved into a canvas for the mind of as much as for the instrument. It welcomes uncertainties, and in accomplishing so, it maintains its enigma vital. Like the Vatican's own protected chambers, it presents precisely sufficient to maintain us returning, pursuing for the component that will make the image comprehensive. And potentially, like all magnificent enigmas, it'll never grant us that tranquility, but will maintain us examining for it in the silent areas between what we perceive and what we aspire to discover. The Vatican exhibitions, when available to the communal, are vital with noise. Movements resonate on stone surfaces. The dim sound of expressions moves from one collection to the subsequent, and the gentle shuffling of tour groups progresses like a current through the passages. But when the final tourist departs and the massive entrances are secured for the darkness, the atmosphere transforms. The immense chambers settle into profound quiet, as if the many ages themselves have drawn a long breath and become still. The lengthy passageways appear boundless in the faint light. Security lamps cast a dull sheen that reflects off the polished stone floors, and the outlines of sculptures loom against the walls. Some of these walls hide storage spaces that are never accessible on any public tour. They contain stacks of paintings, tapestries rolled up like ancient scripts, and artifacts shrouded in protective fabric. These are the objects that, for reasons only understood by a small number of people, will not be displayed in the open galleries. Among these stored riches, one might find artworks that were commissioned and then secretly put away, their subjects perhaps too provocative or too strange for a public audience. There could be preliminary sketches for canvases that are now famous, showing details that the finished versions conceal. There might even be relics connected to the very legends that provided inspiration for the Da Vinci Code. Symbols carved into marble, old handwritten documents containing notes in an unfamiliar script along the margins, or small items whose meaning remains a mystery. To walk through these spaces after the visitors have left is to enter a profoundly different kind of museum. Without the clamour of the crowds, the rooms almost seem awake. The gaze of a nearby statue appears to follow you. A flash of gold in a darkened display case catches the eye like a spark. A door clicks shut somewhere in the distance, serving as a reminder that in this location, nothing is truly unwitnessed. The Vatican protects not only the faith of millions, but also a complex and layered history, much of it too fragile or too controversial to be shown openly. Some of these items are simply waiting for restoration. Others are waiting for a time when the Church determines the world is prepared to see them. And it is possible there are pieces that will never leave these hushed rooms at all, their histories kept safe within the enclosure that has contained them for generations. In the silence of the closed museum, the mind begins to picture what might be concealed in those shadowy archives. A quick drawing from Leonardo's own hand, tucked inside the pages of an old register. A cryptic mark that is absent from all public records. Or perhaps a plain wooden container sealed long ago, holding inside it something that would force us to view history in a completely new light. Whatever the true nature of the secret may be, the darkness preserves it, waiting for the day the lock is finally turned and the light falls once more upon truths long kept hidden. Leonardo's private journals, known as his codices, offer some of the most compelling insights into the mind of any artist across history. Filled with drawings, technical sketches, and pages of backward-written notes, they reveal his unending intellectual curiosity. He sketched flying machines that would not be invented for centuries, studied the precise movement of water, and drew the inner structure of the human body with a level of accuracy far ahead of his era. Some of these codices are publicly known, stored in institutions and libraries where scholars can access them. Others are held in private hands, rarely viewed by anyone outside a small circle. And then there are the whispered stories, those that speak of pages kept far away from any display, possibly locked deep inside the Vatican itself. It is easy to understand why this belief persists. Leonardo spent time in the city of Rome, living under the shadow of the Vatican, and he was trusted enough to move in the same social circles where rare manuscripts and ancient artifacts were kept. During those years, he may have written down observations or copied diagrams from works that are no longer known to exist. If those writings have survived, they would be an irreplaceable treasure not just for historians of art, but for anyone trying to grasp the full extent of his knowledge. The Vatican's archives are enormous, reaching far beyond the rooms most people imagine. Shelves climb high with heavy, leather-bound books, some so delicate that they require handling with gloved hands. Locked storage units protect parchments that have not been opened in decades. In such a location, it would be simple for a single notebook to remain undiscovered, waiting for the right opportunity or the right individual to bring it to light. Leonardo's method of writing makes these notebooks feel like complex riddles. The mirror script forces the reader to slow down, to spend time slowly deciphering each word. Many of his sketches appear straightforward at first glance, but the longer you examine them, the more hidden meaning emerges. A drawing of a mechanical instrument might conceal a subtle, repeating sequence, a series of geometric proportions, or a symbol borrowed from an earlier spiritual tradition. If such hidden elements exist in the pages the world has never seen, they could link his creations to the very mysteries that the Da Vinci Code brought to popular awareness. Imagine walking through the cool, still air of the archives late at night, the rich scent of old paper filling the space. Your footsteps make a soft echo on the stone floor as you follow an archivist to a small desk beneath a single, focused lamp. There, a heavily worn leather volume waits, its internal pages yellowed and thin. You open it with extreme care, and in the peculiar, slanted mirror writing, a drawing begins to form. Something that feels recognizable, yet different enough to make your heart momentarily stop. Whether these rumoured missing pages are truly real or not, the possibility that they exist lies at the heart of the ongoing fascination. It is not only what Leonardo completed, but what he chose to keep private that keeps his silent presence moving through the corridors of history. And if any location could keep such sensitive information secure for centuries, it would be here, behind the heavily guarded enclosure of the Vatican. The Vatican's private archives have long been a source of intense interest for historians, reporters, and writers alike. The very term invites speculation. Though in its original Latin the word secret simply means private. Nevertheless, the concept of miles of floor-to-ceiling shelving, concealed deep within the Vatican's walls, accessible only to a select few, is sufficient to ignite countless theories. The archives contain centuries of official correspondence, state documents, papal records, and countless handwritten manuscripts. Some of these are ordinary, detailing routine management. Others hold the significance of major historical turning points. Missives from monarchs, official decrees that determined the fate of nations, records of religious trials that altered the direction of faith. The sheer quantity of material is astounding. With thousands of records untouched for generations, gaining access is nothing like visiting a local library. Scholars must submit formal applications far in advance, precisely detailing what specific information they hope to study. Even then, they are only shown the exact materials for which they have been granted permission. Under the constant supervision of the archivists, the deeper shelves, the locked vaults, remain absolutely off-limits. What rests there is known only to the few people entrusted with the keys. It is simple to understand how the core ideas in the Da Vinci Code might be connected to such a place. If there were original manuscripts that contradicted accepted history, this is precisely where they would be stored. The very existence of such a safe and restricted repository makes it logical to wonder, could there be personal letters from Leonardo himself, perhaps mentioning work or coded symbols that are not yet understood? Could there be extremely early copies of Gospels that present a different story than the one we have come to know? As you walk through the quiet hallways of the archives, the air feels slightly colder, as if the massive stone walls are holding centuries of secrets closely. The lighting is intentionally subdued, meant to protect fragile ink and delicate parchment. A far-off clock marks the passing minutes, but the rooms themselves appear unaffected by the march of time. Here, the past has not been lost. It is simply contained, waiting for those who are granted permission to look. The Church's official explanation is that the archives act as a necessary safeguard, protecting history from physical destruction, theft, or deliberate misinterpretation. Yet for those who stand outside, the many restrictions only serve to increase the mystery. Every locked entryway becomes a source of speculation. Every unmarked container becomes a fascinating possibility. And in a contemporary world where information is openly shared in so many other places, the fact that this specific knowledge remains so thoroughly guarded feels both archaic and purposefully intended. It is perhaps this atmosphere of strict control that makes the archives such a perfect backdrop for imaginative theories. You are unable to observe everything, but you can definitely sense the immense weight of what might be held there. Like the long shadows cast between the columns of St. Peter's Square after dusk, the hidden spaces you are unable to enter are often the ones you contemplate the most. And so, the archives remain quiet and enduring, preserving their contents just as they have for centuries, offering only small glimpses, never the complete truth. Throughout history, the Vatican has served as the gathering place for important councils, assemblies where the highest leaders of the Church met to make final decisions on matters of faith. These were not small, quick affairs. Bishops, theological experts, and scholars would make extensive journeys from across continents to gather, often for many months and sometimes for years, to engage in serious discussion and define what would become accepted doctrine. Some of these councils have shaped the very foundation of Christianity. The Council of Nicaea in the 4th century confirmed the nature of Jesus' divinity and established the creed that is still recited in churches today. Subsequent councils clarified the meaning of Scripture, addressed intense disputes over its interpretation, and established clear boundaries for what was considered acceptable religious belief. Each final decision was like a piece of bedrock placed in the foundation of the faith, intended to last for all time. But the necessary work of these councils also required drawing firm limits, selecting which writings and teachings would be embraced and which would be definitively set aside. In some notable instances, entire books were deliberately excluded from the official Bible. Certain theological concepts, once openly discussed, were officially declared heretical and removed from any further debate. This action was taken, the Church insisted, to protect the necessary unity of belief. But it also meant that alternative interpretations of early Christian history gradually faded into obscurity. For those who are interested in the themes explored in the Da Vinci Code, these pivotal councils are a logical point of reference. If information concerning Mary Magdalene, the true nature of the Holy Grail, or even the life of Jesus was found to conflict with the direction the Church had chosen, it could have been quietly dismissed in these very meetings. No dramatic burning of manuscripts would have been necessary, simply a decision recorded in official council acts, stating that certain texts were not divinely inspired and should not be read by the faithful. The Vatican meticulously preserves the complete records of these vast gatherings in its secure archives. Bound in protective leather, their pages contain records of detailed debates in meticulous handwriting. Some of the entries are formal and tedious in their procedure. Others strongly hint at fierce internal disagreements, carefully chosen language intended to prevent public controversy, and moments when final decisions were made that would profoundly affect history for centuries. In the quiet solitude of the archives, one might easily imagine sitting at a lengthy wooden table, a flickering candle illuminating a towering stack of parchment. Outside the chamber, the city is utterly silent, but inside, the echoes of those ancient debates seem to linger. You can almost sense the soft rustle of clerical robes, the measured, serious tone of someone formally reading a prepared statement, the low, murmured conversations happening in the corners during recesses. These councils were intended to permanently resolve questions, yet their historical impact often leaves new ones behind. What valuable information might have been lost when those boundaries were established? What profound truths, if any, were deliberately left in the forgotten margins of history, patiently waiting for someone to ask the precise right question? The definitive answers may never leave the dark shelves where they have rested for hundreds of years, but their very absence from the public historical record speaks almost as powerfully as their presence ever could. Among the many religious texts produced in the early centuries of Christianity, there are various writings that were never formally included in the Bible. These are commonly referred to as the apocryphal Gospels, and they narrate events that are both familiar and often strikingly strange. Some focus more heavily on the childhood of Jesus. Others grant Mary Magdalene a far more central and authoritative role, and a select few contain memorable sayings and teachings not documented anywhere else. The Church ultimately chose the four Gospels that we recognise today, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, because their narratives aligned with the faith's developing theological understanding of Jesus' life and divine mission. The others were carefully put aside, sometimes with gentle dismissal, sometimes with severe and firm warnings. Over long periods, many of these excluded writings faded entirely from public awareness, surviving only as scattered fragments or in deliberately hidden copies found in distant monasteries. In the 19th and 20th centuries, significant discoveries brought some of these long-forgotten texts back into the general public light. The Gospel of Thomas, found buried deep in the dry sands of Egypt, contained a collection of sayings that felt both ancient and profoundly mysterious. The Gospel of Mary, although incomplete in its surviving form, offered a rare glimpse of a powerful voice seldom heard in traditional scripture. A woman speaking with genuine authority about the deepest teachings of Jesus. These significant finds sparked intense scholarly interest, but also generated extreme caution. While numerous experts carefully studied them, the Church consistently reminded the faithful that such writings were not considered to be divinely inspired truth. For those who are instinctively drawn to historical mystery, the mere existence of these other Gospels raises a quiet but persistent question. Were they deliberately excluded simply because their narratives did not match the officially chosen trajectory of belief? Or was it perhaps because they contained truths that were considered too complex, too open to radical interpretation? In the intricate world of the Da Vinci Code, such texts could be viewed as the vital missing pieces of a much larger historical puzzle, their absence from the established canon seen as part of a centuries-long, deliberate effort to strictly control the narrative of early history. The Vatican's highly protected archives are rumoured to contain rare and ancient versions of these same works, some perhaps more complete and intact than any we have ever publicly seen. In the profound hush of those massive vaulted rooms, it is easy to picture a securely locked cabinet containing a parchment manuscript with heavily faded ink, its powerful words waiting to be truly read again for the first time in centuries. The fragile parchment might be extremely brittle, the handwriting beautiful but completely unfamiliar. The true significance of its ancient sentences capable of fundamentally shifting the way we understand the past. To have the opportunity to hold such an ancient book would be to physically feel the immense weight of historical time in your hands. Each precious page would carry not only the original voice of its author, but also the deep silence of the many years it spent completely hidden away. Whether or not these writings contain earth-shattering revelations, their very survival against all odds is a kind of quiet act of historical defiance. A powerful reminder that history is rarely a single, simple, or straightforward story, and so they continue to exist. Some are openly displayed in public museums, some are held in carefully protected private collections, and perhaps a few still rest deep within the Vatican's most highly guarded chambers. They wait patiently, as all powerful secrets do, for the precise moment when someone finally chooses to bring them back out into the bright light. Mary Magdalene's documented presence in the official Gospels is brief but profoundly impactful. She is faithfully present at the crucifixion when most of the other disciples have completely fled. And she is the first eyewitness to see the risen Jesus carrying that momentous news back to the disciples. Yet for many centuries, her public image has been repeatedly shaped and reshaped by tradition, popular sermons, and art, sometimes casting her as a notorious sinner, and at other times elevating her as a revered saint. In the world that exists beyond the official church teaching, she has often been imagined as playing a far greater role, a trusted confidant, an influential leader, and even a spiritual partner. The Da Vinci Code placed her right at the very core of its fictional mystery, strongly suggesting that she was not only extremely close to Jesus, but that she also carried his direct bloodline. This core idea is not an entirely modern concept. In the regions of medieval France, various local legends spoke of her dramatic sea voyage, eventually settling in the area of Provence and living out her final days in quiet spiritual devotion. Some of these popular tales portrayed her as a respected teacher in her own right, a figure whose religious authority was presented as rivaling that of the official apostles. The Vatican has consistently refused to support any such alternative interpretations. Officially, Mary Magdalene is strictly honoured as a primary witness to the resurrection and an essential model of sincere repentance and dedicated faith, but nothing more than that. Yet the undeniable fact that her public image has been altered so many times throughout history leaves a strong opening for deep curiosity. Why was she for so long actively merged in popular teaching with another completely separate biblical woman, a move that fundamentally blurred her distinct and unique role? And why has her voice, especially in the earliest years of the developing church, been so noticeably faint in the surviving historical record? In the world of visual art, her depiction is often visually striking. She frequently appears in paintings with long, flowing hair, sometimes holding a delicate jar of ointment, sometimes placed at the base of the cross, and sometimes kneeling in profound reverence before the risen Christ. Each different portrayal carries its own unique, spiritual emphasis. Penitence, deep sorrow, ecstatic joy, or powerful spiritual wisdom. Some artworks subtly hint at a close connection that goes well beyond the strict words of Scripture, a closeness that allows to be explored, but which traditional history simply does not confirm. Imagine a painting completely hidden in a hushed Vatican storeroom, its canvas deeply darkened by the passage of time, depicting a central scene unlike anything found in the public galleries. Perhaps it shows her not at the empty tomb, but standing right alongside Jesus in a quiet moment of shared teaching. Perhaps it contains highly specific symbols we would immediately recognize from other known works by Leonardo or his contemporaries, complex patterns that could potentially link her directly to the very core of the Grail legend. Whether or not such a painting actually exists, the mere thought of it is powerful enough to keep her historical shadow moving quietly through these halls of intense mystery. Her complex story serves as a profound reminder that history is actively shaped not only by what is intentionally preserved, but also, and just as importantly, by what is deliberately left out. And in that ambiguous space between what we have been explicitly told and what we are free to imagine, Mary Magdalene stands quietly, still holding a historical secret that no council, archive, or heavily guarded vault has ever fully and completely revealed. Stone possesses the ability to communicate in absolute silence, and deep within the Vatican's massive walls, every structural column and archway seems to possess a voice. The physical buildings are not merely exceptional works of art, but also intricate, purposeful arrangements of underlying meaning, constantly shaped by centuries of dedicated architects, skilled sculptors, and devoted craftsmen. Sacred geometry, the ancient philosophical belief that specific shapes and mathematical proportions carry inherent spiritual power, has been deeply interwoven into these structures as deliberately as golden thread into a rich tapestry. The magnificent curving colonnades of St. Peter's Square arch out like welcoming arms, a vast symbolic embrace meant to receive the faithful. Yet some observers find more than mere welcome in their perfect and striking symmetry. The precise mathematical proportions reflect common natural patterns, spiral shapes found in seashells, complex branching structures in leaves, designs that ancient philosophers firmly believed mirrored the fundamental order of the entire universe. Inside the great basilica, the columns ascend in exact ratios that perfectly echo the mathematics of musical harmony, as if the very atmosphere itself were finely tuned to a hidden, unheard chord. Leonardo da Vinci was a recognized master of this precise visual language. In his surviving notebooks, he famously drew human figures carefully overlaid with perfect circles and squares, relentlessly searching for the ideal balance between the physical body and pure geometry. The very same principles can be clearly observed in some of the Vatican's main structures, leading certain researchers to strongly wonder whether his profound influence, or the influence of those who shared his philosophical outlook, found its way directly into the city's most profoundly sacred spaces. In the quiet hours of early morning, when the rising sun sends its initial light streaming through the high windows, the inherent geometry becomes visible in numerous subtle ways. Shadows fall in strictly exact, crisp lines. Light collects brightly in specific spots that appear meticulously chosen rather than merely accidental. The meticulously arranged floor tiles form intricate patterns that consciously guide the viewer's eye toward the altar, giving the impression that every single step is an integral part of a much larger, predetermined design. These specific details are seldom mentioned in public sermons, yet they are fully present for anyone genuinely willing to look with careful attention. To those who strongly believe in deeper, hidden historical connections, these structural patterns are not merely aesthetically pleasing. They are vital messages. They clearly suggest that the original builders of the Vatican actively sought to embed timeless core truths directly into the stone itself, truths that could potentially survive even if the written words were eventually lost. In this powerful way, the very walls themselves function as a unique kind of alternative archive, one that fundamentally requires no special key to open, only patience, deep observation, and understanding. It is not impossible to genuinely imagine that somewhere within the Vatican complex there exist detailed drawings, perhaps even originating from Leonardo's own hand, that fully reveal the complete, original intent of these sacred designs. If they were ever found to exist, they would perfectly illustrate the meeting point between religious faith and sophisticated mathematics, between powerful divine inspiration and precise human craftsmanship. Whether these complex patterns are ultimately intended to spiritually guide the soul, to flawlessly reflect the cosmic heavens, or to covertly mark something truly hidden beneath the heavy marble flooring, they powerfully remind us that pure beauty can be its own uniquely effective form of secrecy. Here, every single line intricately carved in stone may be one crucial part of a larger sentence written centuries ago, still patiently waiting for the right person to finally read it. And like so much else contained within these massive walls, the ultimate meaning is deliberately offered only in small, tantalizing fragments, gently inviting the curious seeker to fill in and complete the rest of the historical narrative. The Swiss Guard is instantly recognized around the world for their striking uniforms of blue, vibrant red, and shimmering gold, their distinctive halberds held perfectly upright as they stand constant watch at the Vatican's main gates. To most casual observers, they represent a purely ceremonial presence, an intrinsic part of the traditional pageantry of the Holy See. Yet beneath their disciplined, practiced stillness lies a long, complex history of committed service and deep secrecy that extends all the way back to the early 16th century. Officially established in the year 1506, the Swiss Guard initially began as the Pope's personal, highly trained bodyguard. Switzerland was internationally known for consistently producing skilled, fiercely loyal and reliable professional soldiers, and these specific men swore a sacred oath not only to protect the reigning pontiff, but to willingly sacrifice their own lives in his defence, if ever absolutely necessary. Over the many centuries, they have demonstrably done exactly that, holding their ground firmly in numerous moments of crisis. When hostile forces came dangerously close to the very heart of the Church, their essential duties extend far beyond the narrow view accessible to tourists. Inside the main Vatican complex, they stand guard at private, restricted entrances, formally escort visiting international dignitaries, and constantly watch over certain sensitive chambers where only a strict few are ever permitted to enter. They are equipped with modern firearms, alongside their traditional historical arms, and their intensive training involves far more than merely ceremonial parade drill. It is widely known that each soldier is meticulously prepared for critical security situations that most people would never logically expect to unfold in these outwardly peaceful streets. Some theories suggest that their constant watch extends beyond the personal safety of the Pope himself. The Vatican securely holds priceless treasures, revered relics, and sensitive historical documents that would be highly coveted by collectors and scholars worldwide. While the officially stated role of the Swiss Guard is not specifically to guard historical vaults or internal archives, the quiet, persistent presence of armed, highly trained men in certain internal corridors strongly hints that their protection may well extend to more than just living persons. At night, when the numerous museums are completely dark and the main piazza outside is fully empty, the Swiss Guards continue their silent patrols. Their measured, regular footsteps on the cobblestones echo loudly against the high surrounding walls. They meticulously check every locked gate and shadowed courtyard, their eyes keenly alert even in the deepest stillness. Sometimes their patrol route leads them past completely closed, unmarked doors, behind which the world's ancient, sensitive history waits undisturbed. There are rare, quiet stories of guards who have been formally stationed inside specific rooms they were strictly forbidden to ever discuss afterward. Some suggest these chambers hold relics that are not officially recorded, or items that might cause public uncertainty if they were viewed. Whether these accounts are accurate or not, the vigilance of the security personnel enhances the perception that the Vatican is a place where what is visible is only one fraction of the whole reality. The Swiss Guard serves as a constant sign that the Vatican's enigmas are not restricted to the past. They also involve the present, pertaining to what is being preserved right here and now beneath constant observation, and through their silent commitment, they integrate into the very nature of the confidentiality we seek to comprehend. A tale is recounted only in scattered pieces regarding a room in the Vatican that has no formal designation. It is not marked on visitor maps, nor is it referenced in any guidebooks. Some claim it is situated behind an unmarked entrance at the end of a rarely used walkway. Others locate it beneath one of the older sections, where the stone is dark and shows signs of age and wear. What grants this room its quiet renown among those who share hushed conversations about the Vatican is not its appearance but its function. The few individuals who assert they have seen it describe a setting that is neither luxurious nor heavily ornamented. Instead, it is plain, almost devoid of features, featuring a single table at the centre and shelves stocked with simple containers. Each container, they state, contains an item of importance: a letter, a document, a small artifact, yet devoid of any markers to indicate its significance. Some theorize the room is a temporary stop for objects being transported in or out of the archives, functioning as an intermediary storage area. Others suspect it is where specific materials are kept separate from the rest, items considered too sensitive for open categorization. The notion that these materials could encompass artifacts linked to the themes of the Da Vinci Code, writings concerning Mary Magdalene, drawings by Leonardo, or records of alternative church histories, has ensured the story's continuation. If the room truly exists, access would be infrequent. Perhaps only a select group of trusted aides and archivists would possess the necessary keys, and even they might enter only upon special instruction. It is easy to envision one of them moving silently down the corridor at night, carrying a sealed box, unlocking the massive door and depositing the contents inside without a word. The mystery deepens because the Vatican, when questioned directly, has neither confirmed nor denied the existence of such a location. This refusal to comment is enough to keep the narrative alive. Circulated among journalists, researchers, and those who examine the hidden dimensions of history, the lack of definitive proof transforms into its own form of confirmation. an invitation for speculation to unfold in the mind's eye. You can imagine standing at the entrance of this unnamed room, the air still and cool. Light from a single fixture illuminates the table, projecting long shadows toward the shelves. The boxes are unassuming, yet each seems to carry the cumulative significance of centuries. You sense that whatever resides here has been intentionally isolated from the progression of history, set aside until, if ever, the right moment for its disclosure arrives. Whether this place is imaginary or real, it aligns perfectly with the pattern of the Vatican's greatest secrets. The most profound intrigue does not always reside in the famous relics or the grand halls. Sometimes it is the quiet, undocumented places, those that exist only in unconfirmed rumours, that conceal the deepest truths of all. There is a specific point in every new pope's life when the festivities subside, the cheering from St. Peter's Square becomes distant, and the gravity of the role settles upon him. This moment occurs in a small private space known as the Room of Tears, concealed deep inside the Apostolic Palace. It is where the newly chosen pontiff is led immediately following his acceptance of the position. The room itself is modest, with just enough space for a simple chair, a table, and a cabinet containing papal robes in various sizes. Here the Pope exchanges the red vestments of a cardinal for the white cassock of his new office. There are no crowds, no cameras, only a few attendants and occasionally a confessor. The atmosphere is heavy with quietude, disturbed only by the sound of cloth being taken from its hanger or the faint movement of shoes on the stone floor. It is commonly said that many popes have shed tears here. The name Room of Tears is informal, but it reflects the emotional intensity of the occasion. Some weep out of sincere humility, others from sheer apprehension, and perhaps a few from the realization of the secrets and responsibilities that come with holding the keys of St. Peter. For in this room, the new pope is no longer merely an individual of faith. He becomes the protector of the Church's most profound realities and the shepherd of over 1 billion followers. Some accounts, impossible to verify, propose that during these initial private moments, the Pope may be discreetly informed of certain matters kept from the larger clergy. These might involve practical issues of ongoing diplomacy, severe threats, or delicate political situations. Or they could be more extraordinary. Whispers persist of confidential briefings on hidden relics, undisclosed historical documents, or unexplainable occurrences preserved only within the Vatican's institutional memory. Regardless of whether these stories are historical fact or simple legend, the concept fits with the mystery that clings to this location. Imagine sitting in that room alone, the muted sound of faraway bells marking the hour, understanding that from this point forward, every decision you make could influence the course of history. Within those same walls are archives you may never completely explore, rooms you may never enter, and facts you may choose never to disclose. When the door finally opens and the new pope emerges, the public sees only the tranquil figure in white offering his hand in blessing. The world hears his first public address, but it never hears the reflections that cross his mind in the Room of Tears. Those thoughts remain behind the closed door, like so much else in the Vatican, private, protected, and perhaps never meant to be shared. The Knights Templar began as an order of warrior monks in the early 12th century, dedicated to guarding Christian travellers journeying to the Holy Land. They wore white cloaks adorned with a red cross and adhered to a strict code, blending martial prowess with religious commitment. Over the centuries, their influence expanded. They transitioned from being just protectors to also acting as bankers, managing assets and holdings throughout Europe. Monarchs and nobility trusted them to secure both spiritual and material treasures. With their growing prominence came subtle rumours of deeper objectives. Some believed they were the custodians of relics of immense religious importance, fragments of the true cross, the Holy Grail itself, or the Ark of the Covenant. The Templars consistently refused to confirm these rumours, yet their deliberate secrecy fueled them further. Their command posts, which were often fortified, were said to contain chapels with cryptic symbols, vaults excavated into the natural rock, and chambers accessible only to the highest-ranking members. By the beginning of the 14th century, their extensive power had provoked dangerous hostility. King Philip IV of France, who was heavily indebted to the Templars, plotted their downfall. In 1307, on a single morning in October, he ordered the immediate arrest of every Templar across France. They were indicted on serious charges of heresy, idolatry, and other major offences. Under harsh interrogation, many confessed. Although later evidence suggested these admissions were obtained through coercion, the Vatican faced a major crisis. Pope Clement V, under duress from the king, finally dissolved the order in 1312. Officially, the Templars were condemned, their assets confiscated, and their members dispersed. However, popular legends assert that not all of their wealth or their confidential knowledge was lost. Some accounts claim that a portion of their official records was secretly moved, hidden in locations accessible only to a select few. In the centuries since, the Templars have remained a source of intense curiosity, their name connected to countless theories. Is it possible that they discovered certain facts about early Christianity that conflicted with the established narrative? Could they have transported important relics to safety, perhaps even into the safekeeping of the Vatican itself? Walking through the Vatican today, past its solid walls and shadowed courtyards, it is easy to imagine that somewhere within these ancient boundaries rests a container or a parchment once held by the Templars. Perhaps it is kept in a room so seldom entered that dust has accumulated in heavy layers upon its surface. Perhaps its markings would be meaningless to an average observer, but everything to someone who recognized the ancient emblems of the order. Whether these connections are verified history or enduring folklore, they contribute to the extensive mystery that surrounds the Vatican. The Templars, much like the church institution, left behind more uncertainties than clear answers. And it is in those unresolved areas that narratives like the Da Vinci Code find their most solid foundations. For hundreds of years, the ultimate fate of the Knights Templar was believed to be sealed by their official dissolution. In the early 1400s, the accepted version spoke of heresy, guilt, and final disbandment. Yet in the year 2001, a find within the Vatican archives quietly revised a segment of that history. An Italian scholar specializing in ancient manuscripts, Barbara Frail, uncovered a series of documents long presumed lost. Known as the Chinon parchment, these records detailed the outcome of a secret inquiry conducted by the Church itself. To the astonishment of many, they indicated that Pope Clement V had actually granted absolution to the Templar leaders from the charge of heresy in 1307, even as political pressures were mounting to destroy the order. The parchment, authenticated by the Pope's own seal, suggested that the collapse of the Templars was motivated less by religious faith and more by political leverage. The Vatican had, in essence, exonerated them, but had chosen not to defy King Philip IV's determination to dissolve the order. This key detail, concealed in the archives for almost 700 years, was not a part of the popular understanding until its unexpected reappearance. One must surely wonder why such a significant document remained out of sight for such an extended period. Perhaps it was misfiled among the extensive miles of shelving. Perhaps it was deliberately put away, its contents being too sensitive for a period when the Church's relationship with the Templar legacy was still unclear. Whatever the truth, its long absence demonstrates how easily historical accounts can be altered when critical pieces of information are hidden. The Chinon parchment does not lend credence to the more sensational stories about the Templars, such as their guardianship of the Grail, secret bloodlines, or forbidden knowledge. but it undeniably confirms that the public record was flawed, and if one essential truth could go unnoticed for centuries, might there still be others awaiting discovery? In the silence, it is easy to visualize the moment of its uncovering. A researcher is leaning over a long wooden table, gloved hands carefully unfolding the brittle sheets. The faint aroma of very old ink rises from the parchment. In the gentle light of the archive, Latin written words begin to emerge, their full meaning slowly becoming clear. Outside, the regular life of the city continues, unaware that a key element of the past has just been recontextualized. This is often how the Vatican protects its secrets, not by destroying them, but by allowing them to rest in quietude until the world becomes sufficiently curious or prepared to search them out. And in the matter of the Templars, what was retrieved from those silent shelves may be merely one fragment of a greater narrative that remains sealed behind doors few will ever open. Blood has been spilled on the marble floors of the Vatican on multiple occasions. This was not the result of external military conflict, but from the internal silent conflicts within its stately walls. For all its image of spiritual tranquility, the history of the Holy See is punctuated by instances of conspiracy, betrayal, and sudden, unexpected death. These episodes, sometimes preserved solely in unverified stories, reveal the deep human conflicts beneath the outward religious grandeur. During the Renaissance, the Vatican served not only as a spiritual capital, but also as a political power, its sphere of influence reaching across various kingdoms. Envoys and cardinals moved through its chambers, each possessing personal ambitions, political connections, and adversaries. Theological disagreements often masked underlying struggles for dominance. A word spoken carelessly at the wrong time could result in banishment, loss of reputation, or worse. One of the most compelling stories is that of Pope John Paul I, who passed away in 1978 after serving just 33 days in his position. Officially, the cause was listed as a heart attack, yet the unexpected nature of his death, combined with the administrative changes he was reportedly planning, gave rise to suspicions that have never completely disappeared. Some claim he had started to investigate financial activities within the Vatican Bank too closely. Others suggest he intended to challenge certain established authorities and that his proposed actions were too radical to be permitted to proceed for long. In earlier centuries, the stakes were similarly high. There are historical accounts of cardinals collapsing during intense private elections, of trusted assistants vanishing without any explanation, of key documents disappearing at the precise moment they might have altered the balance of power. Marble absorbs very little sound, but it seems to retain the faint echo of hurried movements and voices lowered in urgent conversation. To walk through the Vatican at night with the knowledge of these past events is to sense that the quietness may be entirely misleading. The frescoes and statues observe in silence, but the floors beneath one's feet have borne witness to occasions when critical decisions were made not in public prayer, but in the dark areas, where religious faith and political power existed in a strained partnership. Blood on marble does not leave a visible permanent mark, yet the memory of it persists in the stories whispered quietly from one generation to the next. And in a location where official documents are meticulously maintained, it's often the unrecorded details, the discussions never written down, the names never formally entered that carry the most weight. These events serve as a reminder that the mysteries of the Vatican are not limited to forgotten manuscripts and ancient artifacts. They also involve the complexity of the human spirit, with all its determination, desire for power and imperfection. And just as the archives preserve the history of popes and church councils, the marble surfaces hold the unspoken record of lives that were drastically changed and sometimes prematurely ended. Behind these well-secured walls, there is a narrative about a scholar who arrived at the Vatican with a clear objective, keen to examine its treasures and illuminate the less explored aspects of church history. His name is seldom spoken now, as if mentioning it might disrupt the profound quiet that has enveloped his departure from public view. He was granted approval to use certain reading rooms, accessing a few shelves much deeper than most casual visitors could ever reach. For many weeks, he worked entirely in silence, his days marked by the slow action of turning pages and the gentle sound of writing notes in a bound leather notebook. Archivists described him as respectful, hard-working, and exceptionally focused, often remaining until the very last minute before the rooms closed for the day. He kept the subject of his research private, although one staff member recalled him requesting a collection of papers connected to the church's early councils. These were records that were rarely handled, their Latin handwriting fading on the aged parchment. Then, without any announcement, he was gone. His workspace in the archive was left organised, but his journal was missing. No official statement was released, and no explanation was offered. Those who knew him simply said he had returned to his home country, though none could articulate why the departure was so abrupt. In the following weeks, a subtle sense of unease spread among those who had observed him there. A few suggested quietly that he had discovered something unexpected, something not intended for further examination. The Vatican, for its part, offered no clarification. Perhaps it was a family issue or a health concern. Perhaps his scholarly work had simply reached its conclusion. But the lack of specific details allowed for conjecture, and in that vacuum the narrative expanded. Some imagined a lost text with potential ramifications for the Church's established history. Others spoke of a secret cipher hidden within the edges of an ancient book. In reality, archives are full of instances like this. Scholars who arrive and then disappear, their labour undocumented, their findings never made public. Most go completely unnoticed, but when the location in question is the Vatican, even the smallest unexplained situation feels imbued with significant meaning. If you visit the reading rooms today, you might pass the very desk where he once sat. The air carries a faint scent of paper and aged dust, and the light falls in narrow beams across the tables. Somewhere behind a tightly locked door, the documents he examined still wait in their silent spot. Whether they contain anything remarkable or not is a question that may never be definitively resolved. Sometimes, in a place built upon centuries of protected knowledge, a sudden absence leaves behind more than an unoccupied chair. It leaves a story, one that becomes yet another strand in the complex fabric of secrets the Vatican seems designed to preserve. Among the various religious communities within the Catholic Church, few provoke as much fascination as the Jesuits. Established in the 16th century by Ignatius of Loyola, they became recognized for their rigorous intellect, profound discipline, and willingness to serve wherever the Church required their presence. They educated in major universities, offered counsel to monarchs, journeyed to the most distant parts of the world, and frequently found themselves at the intersection of both exploration and debate. The Jesuits were, and continue to be, academics as much as they are ordained priests. Their expansive libraries contain volumes in numerous languages collected from every continent. Their correspondence from previous centuries recounts meetings with emperors, astronomers, and tribal leaders, often detailing traditions and belief systems entirely unknown to Europe. In their pursuit of learning, they became highly skilled at both withholding and sharing the knowledge they acquired. For this reason, some perceive the Jesuits as the discreet keepers of truths that are either too complicated or too sensitive for the general public. They served as counselors to popes, provided confession to royalty, and at times acted as negotiators in complex matters where religious faith and political interests intersected. The Vatican entrusted them with delicate and sensitive assignments, and in return, they cultivated an expertise in discretion that became central to their collective identity. it is not difficult to suspect that if there were any writings, objects, or even encoded information related to the narratives in the Da Vinci Code, the Jesuits would be aware of them. Their scholars possess the ability to interpret ancient scripts in their original language, trace the complex history of religious symbols across eras, and identify patterns that others might miss completely. Their commitment often required them to hold back their discoveries until an opportune moment, or perhaps permanently. Within the walls of the Vatican, Jesuit influence has impacted everything from scientific astronomy to advanced education. They have managed the Vatican Observatory for hundreds of years, observing the stars from an institution that also protects the most sacred relics of the faith. Some have speculated about what potential connections might exist between their scientific archives and the secured chambers of the Apostolic Palace. Could there be diagrams, charts, or manuscripts that link celestial phenomena to the religious symbols carved into the oldest structures in Rome? The Jesuits themselves rarely discuss such topics openly. When they do speak, their language is highly measured, carefully chosen to encourage deeper thought rather than to satisfy general curiosity. And so the essential questions remain. Just how much information do they possess? How much have they been instructed to keep confidential? To walk past the residential area of the Jesuit scholars in the Vatican is to pass doorways that may lead to shelves of texts that have not been viewed by the public for generations. Behind them, there may be pages that could fundamentally alter the established account of history. Or, perhaps, they only hold the cumulative knowledge of centuries, wisdom that is valuable enough to protect closely, even if it does not change the world at all. Hidden within the Vatican's extensive collections are certain maps that are unlike those displayed in public exhibitions. These are not the well-known Renaissance masterpieces that attract visitors, but older, more unusual charts, some painted on parchment so thin it feels fragile to the touch. They are stored in specialized climate-controlled containers, their surfaces subtly illuminated under the gentlest lighting. They are seen only by a select number of specialized historians and archivists who have received explicit authorization. These maps illustrate coastlines that no longer exist, ancient settlements whose names have been lost to memory, and boundary lines drawn before modern nations were fully established. Some depict regions as they were envisioned centuries prior to their discovery by explorers, their geographical features drawn from circulating rumours rather than from direct observation. Others appear more precise, hinting at first-hand knowledge of places the Church is not generally known to have visited during that time. One continuous rumour is that a few of the maps in the Vatican's collection reference locations that are now missing from contemporary records, sites that may have been deliberately destroyed, intentionally covered up, or submerged underwater. A tiny island in the Mediterranean, marked with symbols suggesting a church structure. A village deep within the North African deserts that is not found on any modern atlas. A mountain in South America sketched with a Christian cross at its very peak, long before official missionaries arrived. Scholars who find credence in these rumours wonder if such places were connected to relics, important documents, or events the Church made a decision not to disclose. If a specific site held an object of either historical or spiritual importance, removing it from public awareness might have been a calculated measure to protect it from being stolen, or to avoid raising uncomfortable questions the Church preferred to leave unanswered. Imagine carefully opening one of these storage drawers and slowly unrolling a map so fragile that its edges visibly crumble with every breath. The ink has faded to a muted brown, the lettering is densely packed and precise, and the surrounding ocean is filled with the intricate, detailed illustrations characteristic of medieval cartographers. Large ships with full sails, imagined sea creatures emerging from the waves. Yet, in a secluded corner, a single symbol stands out, small but intentionally placed, identifying a spot that cannot be found on any current navigational chart. Whether these maps genuinely conceal such powerful secrets or not, their sense of mystery comes partly from their silence. They do not offer immediate explanations. They simply await thoughtful interpretation, and in that anticipation, they become an integral part of the Vatican's quiet power. A potent reminder that history is not solely found in printed books, but is also rendered in geographical lines and curves, sometimes leading to places that are now entirely unreachable. And if the stories hold true, some of those lines might point directly to the central, most enduring enigmas of the Church, accurately charted centuries ago and then deliberately put away, where only the cautious turning of a page can bring them back into the light. Leonardo da Vinci's time spent in Rome is often overshadowed by his more famous periods in Florence and Milan. Yet it was in the Eternal City that some of his most intriguing commissions were supposedly undertaken. Around the year 1515, under the patronage of Pope Leo VI, Leonardo worked in close proximity to the Vatican's inner administration. He resided near the Belvedere courtyard, an area that provided a vital connection between papal living quarters and various workshops, libraries, and gardens. It was a space where engineers and artists were regularly put to work. Official records document projects involving hydraulics, defensive structures, and set designs for elaborate court events. However, Leonardo's own notes from this era are strikingly scarce, as if certain designs were either written in an obscure code or entirely confined to his memory. This noted omission has led some to believe that he was engaged in tasks the Vatican wished to keep strictly confidential. A few surviving fragments hint at drawings of large-scale machinery for moving massive stones, potentially connected to construction work on St. Peter's Basilica. Others suggest studies of the interplay between light and shadow, which some interpret as preparatory work for the ornamentation of a private chapel. His deep interest in human anatomy also continued. And, while public dissection was a sensitive matter in Rome, Leonardo's highly detailed anatomical knowledge suggests he may have found ways to pursue his studies discreetly. Certain scholars believe he may have been specifically commissioned to develop symbolic patterns, designs that could be subtly integrated into architectural elements or ornamentation in ways that only a well-trained observer would notice. According to this view, his genius lay not only in his inventive capacity or his painting, but in his ability to embed profound meaning into forms that appeared purely decorative. The specific curve of a pillar, the strategic location of a window, the exact proportion between the height and the width of a small altar niche. Each could potentially contain a hidden signature. In the serene atmosphere of the Vatican's gardens, it is easy to imagine Leonardo strolling by himself, contemplating his ideas. In his mind, he would have heard the church bells of St. Peter's, the gentle sound of nearby fountains, and the distant singing from the Sistine Chapel. Perhaps he carried a small pocketbook, its pages filled with notes, written in his characteristic mirror script, that even a curious onlooker would find difficult to decipher. When he eventually departed from Rome a few years later, he took most of his completed work with him. What he left behind may still be located somewhere within the Vatican's extensive confines. Loose pages in a locked folder, a sketch concealed within the binding of a different book, or perhaps even a deliberate design etched into stone, where no one thinks to look for it. In the gaps that exist between verifiable facts and conjecture, Leonardo's Roman assignments become yet another element in the ongoing mystery of Vatican secrets. Their specific details, preserved not through public display, but in the veiled areas where religious faith, artistic expression, and profound mystery quietly converge. In the Vatican, there is a specific, rarely discussed office distinct from its more public roles, the position of the papal librarian. This specific responsibility is far more significant than simply being a manager of books. The individual who holds this title is entrusted with the literal and figurative keys to some of the most highly restricted shelves in existence. The title has been conferred across centuries, and each librarian is carefully selected not only for their high level of scholarship but also for their proven capacity for discretion. The papal librarian is the overseer of millions of manuscripts, maps, and printed volumes, yet it is the private vaults and locked cabinets that attract the most intense speculation. These areas are not accessible for general research requests or public tours. Some require the simultaneous turning of two separate keys, each held by a different person. Others are secured with elaborate wax seals that are only broken under the direct instruction of the Pope. It is said that in certain special circumstances, the librarian is summoned to retrieve a specific document for the Pope alone, an action performed in absolute silence with the item handed over and no questions exchanged. The content might be a treaty long erased from public awareness, a letter written centuries ago, or a book so unique it exists nowhere else in the world. Rumours suggest that some of these items directly relate to the common themes found in the Da Vinci Code, manuscripts hinting at non-official church histories, sketches from artists like Leonardo that were never made public, or theological works that were once officially banned and then hidden away. Whether these claims are based on reality or imagination, the thought of a single individual quietly holding the access to them contributes significantly to the aura of deep secrecy. In the late hours, once the public reading rooms are entirely empty, the librarian may still be conducting work. Imagine the crisp sound of a key being turned in a very old lock, the slow, deep sound of a door that has not been opened in years, the subtle aroma of aged parchment that has been waiting for centuries to be touched again. Inside, a single volume might be resting on a silk cushion, its script written in an unfamiliar hand, its pages trimmed with genuine gold leaf. The primary duty of the librarian is to ensure preservation, not to offer interpretation or judgment. Some of these valuable works will certainly never be read in the current generation. Others may only be shown to a scholar who has successfully earned the necessary trust of both the passage of time and the Vatican establishment. And so the papal librarian remains a figure of profound, quiet authority, the protector of a collection that is part historical library, part secure vault, and part living time capsule. Through their dedicated hands pass the critical pieces of history that challenge, shape, and sometimes fundamentally upset the established official narrative. And within those highly protected cabinets may indeed rest certain truths that for the immediate future will continue to be sealed away. Beneath the immense scale of St. Peter's Basilica lies a world that few people have ever fully explored. A space where the temperature is lower and the light falls dimly upon ancient stone. Here, underneath the colossal weight of centuries, are the grottos and the necropolis, layers of cumulative history stacked one on top of the other. Visitors who are permitted to descend into the public sections catch only a fleeting glimpse, chapels honouring previous popes, the final resting places of various saints. Walls are covered with inscriptions in both Greek and Latin. But much deeper still, beyond the regular routes, lies a hidden area completely inaccessible to most eyes. The necropolis is essentially a very old city of the dead, its origins tracing back to the time before Christianity became established in Rome. Its tombs and narrow walkways once stood out in the open air just outside the ancient city limits. Over successive years, the ground level was continuously built upward, effectively covering the numerous graves beneath. When Constantine, the first Christian emperor, commissioned a grand basilica built in the 4th century, it was situated directly over what tradition held to be the tomb of St. Peter himself. Centuries later, excavations performed in the mid-1900s uncovered these deep, forgotten layers once more. Mosaics still adhered to the walls, retaining their vivid colours even after being hidden in darkness for hundreds of years. Marble sarcophagi rested exactly where ancient families had placed them long ago. Inscriptions recounted tales of lives now lost to time, with some markings bearing symbols that suggest the coexistence of pagan and Christian beliefs in those foundational days. The Vatican permits only carefully restricted entry to these underground chambers, citing the essential need for preservation. Nevertheless, some people believe that additional sealed rooms exist even beneath these excavated areas, chambers whose contents have never been publicly disclosed. Theories span from caches of early Christian relics to documents that could potentially rewrite accepted historical timelines. Others speculate on artifacts related to biblical events, moved here during periods of chaos for ultimate safekeeping. Standing in those dim subterranean corridors, the noise of the contemporary city above completely vanishes into silence. The stone walls feel alive with the march of time, each block containing memories far older than the towering basilica itself. The subtle aroma of dry earth and antiquity hangs suspended in the air, a scent that has gone unchanged for countless generations. If any secrets are truly hidden down here, they remain meticulously guarded, their access points known to only a chosen few. And perhaps that outcome is appropriate. For beneath the most public emblem of the Catholic Church lies a bedrock founded not only on faith, but also on profound mystery. A powerful reminder that the structure visible above ground is merely one piece of the narrative, and that the Vatican's deepest truths may reside far below the reach of daylight. Long before St. Peter's Basilica assumed its modern grandeur, the site it occupies was part of a sprawling Roman necropolis, a vast burial ground situated then on the periphery of the city. During the reign of Emperor Constantine, this entire district was reshaped to serve as the foundation for the first monumental church. To establish a necessary flat building surface, the Romans constructed an enormous platform, deliberately interring sections of the necropolis beneath thousands of tons of packed earth and stone. Archaeologists refer to this stabilizing foundation layer as Constantine's Plateau. It is a concealed stratum of history unseen by the millions of pilgrims who traverse the square every year. Deep beneath the basilica's marble floors and soaring columns, the plateau entombs the remains of ancient roads, family tombs, and freestanding walls that were once exposed to the open air. Some of these buried structures still exhibit their painted decorations, faint yet still visible, their original colours preserved across the centuries by the surrounding darkness. When modern archaeological work began in the 1940s, the excavators discovered not only the expected grave sites, but also signs of prior buildings, small religious shrines, pre-Christian altars, and inscriptions incised in both Latin and Greek. These findings strongly suggested that the location had been considered sacred for an extended period, even before the Christian faith claimed it. It was as though multiple layers of devotion had accumulated, each new belief system leaving its quiet signature on the very same ground. There are specific segments of Constantine's Plateau that have never been accessed since the moment they were originally sealed. Some existing corridors abruptly terminate at walls that appear structurally newer than the surrounding masonry, hinting at a purposeful closure. What lies beyond these points remains unknown. Perhaps merely more burial sites, or possibly objects intentionally concealed before the basilica rose overhead. A few historians speculate that the earliest Christian congregations might have interred their most precious relics within these sealed-off voids, protecting them during periods of official persecution. Standing on the vast basilica floor, it is almost impossible to truly grasp the monumental depth of history resting directly beneath one's feet. The compressive weight of centuries presses silently upward. Somewhere far below, unseen and unheard, Constantine's builders laboured to cover up a previous world that in some fundamental ways was likely never intended to be rediscovered. Whether by intentional plan or by simple coincidence, the plateau has become a massive vault, an immense unlabelled repository nestled beneath one of the most sacred places in all of Christendom. And just like many of the Vatican's deeper secrets, its full narrative remains perpetually locked in stone, patiently awaiting the future moment when someone finally has the resolve to breach the barrier and uncover what is held in the darkness beyond. When the workmen of St. Peter's Basilica assembled stone for its colossal walls, they did not always source new blocks from distant quarries. A significant portion of the construction material was repurposed from the extensive ruins of Rome itself. Temples, public baths, and monuments from the pagan era had stood for many centuries, their marble and granite expertly shaped by craftsmen long preceding the arrival of Christianity. Some of these recycled stones carried more than just structural strength and beauty. Carvings of old gods, symbolic animals, and various ancient emblems still mark their surfaces. In some instances, the pagan images were meticulously chiselled away before the stone blocks were set into the walls, leaving only subtle outlines beneath a smooth surface. In other cases, the pagan designs were left entirely intact, quietly hidden deep inside the structure where no outside observer would ever see them again. This construction practice was partially an issue of practicality, allowing the reuse of solid, high-value stone. However, it also held a potent symbolic meaning for the early Christians. Constructing their most important church from the physical remnants of Rome's previous religion was a deliberate way to assert triumph over the past. Yet this practice also meant that fragments of the pagan world became an intrinsic part of the Christian one, their quiet presence permanently preserved at the very core of the Vatican. Over time, periodic restorations have occasionally brought these concealed relics to light. A section of wall undergoing repair might expose the faint edge of a carving depicting an old Roman deity. A column in a dark, shadowed corner might reveal a decorative pattern once ubiquitous in a previous temple. Each time, the discovery is quietly logged and then immediately covered once more, as if the ancient faith must be kept hidden beneath the new one. Some experts believe that specific areas of the basilica and the surrounding Vatican buildings contain far more of these repurposed stones than is generally acknowledged. If the walls could be carefully stripped away, layer by layer, they might reveal a vast mosaic of ancient imagery, a silent testament that Rome's many spiritual traditions have always been closely interwoven. To traverse St. Peter's today is to witness only a fraction of its complete story. Beneath the highly polished floors and the lavish gilded decorations lies an entirely different history, one physically built into the very supporting framework of the structure, where pagan gods have been turned to face the wall. Their sculptural forms, sealed in perpetual shadow, remain silent witnesses to the emergence and ascendancy of a new faith. And though the countless pilgrims who walk the marble floors above will never see them, their enduring presence is a quiet truth physically held within the stone, a fact that the Vatican keeps completely without explanation. The great architects of the Vatican understood how to manipulate much more than just marble and paint. They fully grasped the compelling language of light. Throughout the grand basilicas and chapels, natural sunlight is never permitted to enter arbitrarily. It is carefully directed, deliberately shaped, and perfectly timed, streaming in through windows positioned with absolute precision. At certain times of the day, a single beam will illuminate a specific altar or brilliantly highlight a particular mosaic. The resulting effect is so flawless that it can often be mistaken for happenstance. Yet it is anything but accidental. The original builders meticulously studied the path of the sun across the heavens and precisely calculated where its rays would fall during major feast days or moments of essential ritual significance. In this ingenious way, light itself became an integral element of the Church's message, communicating profound ideas in a language that needed no spoken words. Certain patterns of illumination are known to the public. Visitors easily observe the way morning light floods the vast nave of St. Peter's, or how the Sistine Chapel appears to radiate a golden glow during particular hours. But other effects are hidden, understood only by those who comprehend the architecture's deeper, sacred geometry. A narrow shaft of sunlight might strike an unmarked floor tile only one time a year, perhaps exactly on the anniversary of a revered saint's martyrdom. Another window might be deliberately angled so that its light briefly reveals a minute carving high up in the dome, remaining invisible for the rest of the year. The structural proportions of the buildings themselves sometimes deliberately reflect these solar patterns. Mathematical ratios found in the fundamental measurements of the basilica closely align with those seen in Leonardo da Vinci's studies of human anatomy, suggesting a profound harmony between divine blueprint and the natural form. Whether this was intended symbolism or merely the shared universal language of Renaissance art and scientific inquiry is a topic still actively debated. To stand in one of these magnificent spaces when the pre-calculated light arrives is to feel the passage of centuries simply disappear. The focused golden beam touches the stone just as it has for hundreds of years, carrying the identical warmth and casting the exact same shadows. It serves as a potent reminder that the core message of the Church has always been delivered, not solely through formal scripture and established ritual, but also through the careful, deliberate shaping of the physical world in which those rituals unfold. The language communicated through light is subtle and fleeting. It demands nothing and explains nothing, yet it leaves a quiet, indelible impression on the human spirit. In this profound sense, the Vatican's intricate architecture transforms into another type of scripture, written not with ordinary ink, but with the contrast of shadow and sun, its ultimate meaning still available to those individuals patient enough to simply watch and truly wonder. In the Vatican's immense archival collection, there are persistent tales of historical manuscripts that seemingly vanish for many centuries, only to surface again in the most completely unexpected manner. One such compelling story recounts a book that was never actually lost, merely carefully disguised. It began with a dedicated scholar meticulously sorting through countless volumes in a quiet, seldom used section of the archives. He was specifically looking for a particular set of medieval sermons bound together in a simple, unremarkable leather cover, its pages brittle and thin from extreme age. As he began to turn the leaves, he noticed that a few sections appeared markedly older than the remainder of the text. The handwriting shifted, the ink was noticeably darker and more deliberate, and the language itself was vastly different from the simple Latin used in the sermons. With great care, he scrutinized the binding. The outer cover was clearly newer, possibly added sometime in the 17th century. Inside, expertly stitched into the spine between the expected texts, was an entire separate manuscript, a work that no official catalogue had ever recorded. Its script was ancient, the style suggesting the earliest Christian era, and it contained extensive passages that did not align with any known gospel. Archivists were immediately summoned, and the book was quietly removed for rigorous study. No public statement was ever issued. Officially, it was simply catalogued and placed into heavily restricted storage. Whether its contents profoundly altered any established understanding of church history was never formally disclosed. Some people believe it may have been a forbidden, apocryphal text, deliberately hidden inside a harmless volume to ensure its survival from systematic destruction during periods of strict religious orthodoxy. The underlying idea is entirely plausible. In centuries past, scribes sometimes recycled older parchments, either writing new text over the original or binding them into new books to conserve the costly material. But in select rare cases, this kind of reuse was actually a clever way to smuggle controversial or dangerous words into safer, trusted hands. A meticulously disguised manuscript could successfully cross political borders, sit completely unnoticed on a dusty monastery shelf, and ultimately survive centuries of religious censorship. Somewhere deep within the Vatican's restricted rooms, such a book might still be resting, its simple cover offering no indication of the intellectual treasure concealed within. Only those who are intimately familiar with the telltale signs would ever guess that the faded sermons actually hide something much more profound. It is a powerful reminder that in a place as ancient and deeply layered as the Vatican, profound truth can be concealed not only within secured, locked vaults, but also in plain sight, patiently waiting for the proper set of eyes to turn the correct page. Among the most unusual stories, quietly whispered, about the Vatican, is the one concerning the chronovisor, a fantastic device some claim was engineered to literally observe the passage of time itself. The bizarre tale first emerged in the 1960s when an Italian priest named Father Pellegrino Ernetti publicly alleged he had helped in the machine's actual construction. He described it as a large, polished cabinet filled with numerous complex levers, dials, and an integrated screen that was capable of displaying past historical scenes. According to his specific account, the chronovisor could accurately tune into moments in history as if they were still happening, flawlessly capturing both the image and the accompanying sound. Ernetti claimed to have personally witnessed events as ancient as a dramatic performance in classical Rome and even the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. He theorized that the device functioned by meticulously detecting the residual energy that all past events permanently leave behind in the very fabric of the universe, a kind of echo that never fully dissipates. Skeptics immediately dismissed the entire concept, but the story stubbornly endured, partly because Ernetti adamantly insisted that the Vatican maintained the machine in absolute secrecy to prevent its widespread misuse. The official church has never once confirmed the chronovisor's purported existence. No photographs or technical blueprints have ever been officially verified, and many believe the entire thing was a hoax or a severe misunderstanding. Yet, the persistent thought of such a powerful device being hidden within one of the Vatican's secure rooms is difficult to completely dismiss. If it were somehow real, its transformative potential would be staggering, not only for thoroughly understanding history but also for potentially verifying or utterly disproving sacred pivotal events. Imagine a simple polished wooden crate resting deep in the archives, its brass fittings dull and tarnished with age. The lid is securely closed, the locks are entirely intact. Only a tiny handful of living people know what might be inside. Perhaps it is nothing more than an empty container from a failed, abandoned experiment. Or perhaps it is something far more extraordinary, a tool capable of opening a visual window onto centuries long past and gone. If the chronovisor exists, it would immediately explain the Vatican's carefully maintained silence. Such a device would be far more than a mere historical curiosity. It would represent a power beyond calculation, one that could potentially reshape global faith, challenge fundamental authority, or expose uncomfortable truths best left in shadow. And whether the story is a brilliant invention or a heavily guarded reality, it fits perfectly into the established pattern of persistent mysteries that consistently surround the Holy See. Fragments of possibility locked away where they can be neither fully proven nor entirely dismissed. In the highly formal ceremonial life of the Vatican, symbols are truly ubiquitous. They are intricately woven into clerical robes, delicately engraved on chalices, deeply carved into marble, and dramatically painted high on ceilings where only the most dedicated and observant eyes ever notice them. To the vast majority of visitors, these various emblems are simply considered a part of the Church's extensive artistic heritage. Yet a few of them carry profound meanings layered far beneath their surface appearance. Certain papal insignias, for instance, are much more than purely decorative. The symbolic keys of St. Peter, the triple crown of the papal tiara, the flowing branching vines and the majestic lilies, each possesses a clear theological meaning that is taught openly. But contained within the fundamental design, subtle changes in proportion, colour or placement may be intended to signal something else entirely, understood only by individuals within specific internal circles. A particular curve in the painted vine might subtly echo the precise form of a celestial constellation. The specific arrangement of jewels might perfectly match the diagrammatic layout of a cathedral floor plan. Historians specialising in sacred art have long debated how intentional such complex coding truly is. In some documented cases, records show that artists were given extremely precise instructions to incorporate specific symbolic numbers or geometric shapes into their work. 7 petals to represent the 7 gifts of the Spirit, 12 distinct stars for the apostles, 3 perfectly interlocking circles for the Holy Trinity. But in the hands of a truly master craftsman, these elements could be arranged in ways that also conveyed meanings derived from much older traditions, subtly blending Christian iconography with faint echoes of ancient philosophy or sacred geometry. Imagine a blessing being delivered by the Pope during a major feast day. As he raises his hand, the intricate embroidery on his vestment catches the sunlight, the fine gold thread outlining a pattern that perfectly mirrors a diagram taken from Leonardo's secret notebooks. The devoted faithful see only beauty and piety. A scholar specializing in symbology might perceive an intentional hidden message, a quiet reminder of knowledge that the Church recognizes but deliberately chooses not to disseminate from the pulpit. Such coded messages may not be intended to hide dangerous secrets, but rather to preserve an established tradition of communication through art, passing silent messages between different generations. Without needing words, these symbols remain completely visible in plain sight, impossible to destroy, yet virtually invisible to those who do not possess the specific knowledge of where to look. In this quiet manner, the Vatican's monumental architecture speaks in much more than just scripture and ceremony. It communicates in fluid curves and sharp lines, in the shimmering glint of gold thread, in the subtle, quiet language of form. And for those patient enough to carefully study its patterns, these elaborate designs may be just as revealing as any written historical record sealed away in the archives. Not every highly skilled artist eagerly welcomed the opportunity to work directly for the Vatican. There is a quiet, little-known story of one particular painter who surprisingly declined a papal commission, a decision almost unheard of during his historical time. His name appears only infrequently in official church records, as if his controversial choice was politely erased from memory. Yet, fragments detailing his life survive in private letters and personal journals. He was highly regarded for his exceptional skill with colour, for the incredibly lifelike quality of his portraits, and for a certain defiant independence that made him both widely admired and, at times, very difficult to manage. When the Vatican formally invited him to produce a series of magnificent frescoes for a private chapel, it was universally regarded as an undeniable, supreme honour. But after carefully reviewing the project plans, he respectfully declined the offer. The reason, according to a preserved letter written to a close friend, was that the required subject matter had been secretly altered from the original proposal. He vaguely hinted at themes he considered deeply troubling, though he never explicitly named them. Some individuals believe he strongly objected to a specific theological interpretation of Scripture, one that he felt diverged too greatly from its original source. Others suggest the commission might have required him to include specific symbols or figures he found profoundly unsettling. Turning down such a highly visible offer carried significant professional risks. It could have resulted in the immediate loss of powerful, wealthy patrons, or even his quiet, unofficial exclusion from the very circles where all major artistic commissions were decided. Yet the painter stood his ground, returning instead to his personal workshop and continuing to create works that, while undoubtedly beautiful, never ultimately adorned the halls of the Vatican. Over time, his firm refusal became a kind of unspoken historical footnote in art history. Visitors to various museums might briefly pause before one of his surviving masterpieces, completely unaware that the same masterful hand had once been invited to leave its lasting mark on the sacred walls of the Holy See. Whether his final decision was motivated by personal conscience, simple caution, or a private understanding of the Church's internal expectations, it remains a rare instance of someone consciously turning away from the exact kind of opportunity most artists of his generation would have grasped without any hesitation. And so his narrative, like many untold stories within the Vatican's enduring shadow, is not defined by what was successfully created, but rather by what was deliberately left unfinished. A distinct gap in the historical record where a great painting might have stood, and where the core reasons for its absence remain exclusively known to the one man who chose to say no. There was a historical period when musical performance within the Vatican was regarded not only as an act of religious devotion, but also as a matter of significant secrecy. Certain complex compositions, despite their undeniable beauty, were intentionally kept from public audiences for centuries. They were composed specifically for moments considered so sacred that only a small select circle of clergy and musicians were ever permitted to hear them. One of the most prominent examples involves a specific choral work said to have been performed exclusively inside the Sistine Chapel during the observance of Holy Week. The composition was so fiercely guarded that the singers were strictly forbidden from copying the sheet music. It was instead passed down solely by oral memory from one generation of the specialized choir to the next, every single note painstakingly learned within the chapel itself, far away from any outside listeners. The rationale behind this was partly to protect the perceived sanctity of the music. It was widely believed that the powerful piece possessed a spiritual quality that could only be fully realized in the exact physical location for which it was originally composed. Beneath the vividly painted ceiling, with the candlelight gently flickering across the legendary frescoes, some people quietly whispered that the harmonies contained a structural form echoing much older, ancient chants, their musical intervals carrying profound meaning beyond the mere beauty of the sound. Inevitably, the music's enforced secrecy was broken. A singularly gifted young listener once attended the sacred service, successfully memorized the entire complex work, and later transcribed the notes to paper. When the composition was finally performed outside the Vatican, it generated both widespread artistic admiration and serious internal concern. The Church could not undo the permanent sharing of the notes, but the powerful aura of mystery surrounding the piece has never fully dissipated. Even in the present day, there are known compositions within the Vatican's vast archives that have not been publicly performed in modern times. Some may simply be minor works, justly forgotten because they fell out of contemporary style. Others, however, may be carefully guarded for complex reasons known only to those individuals who ultimately decide what music is sung and what is permanently relegated to silence. Music has a unique ability to carry deep memory, to hold the exact emotional resonance of a moment long after all the words have been forgotten. Within the sacred space of the Vatican, those hidden melodies are like sealed, locked doors, still resonating with power, still patiently waiting, but only to be unlocked on those extremely rare occasions when the right voices and the precise physical location come together once more. In the complex maze of Vatican corridors, there are secluded passageways that lead to places very few people have ever entered, and among them is one spoken of only in hushed, lowered voices. The sealed staircase. Its main entrance is completely unremarkable, a simple narrow archway cut into a plain stone wall. Yet it is entirely blocked by a thick wooden door heavily reinforced with old iron. The original hinges are ancient, the lock is even older, and the key to it is rumoured to be kept separate from all other Vatican keys. No official public record explains precisely where the staircase leads. Some archivists theorise it once simply connected different levels of the Apostolic Palace and was sealed off during major structural renovations centuries ago. Others believe it may have led to a private papal chamber or a storage area, whose contents were eventually moved, leaving the space permanently abandoned. But persistent stories inevitably flourish in the complete absence of certainty. A few whispers claim the steps descend into an underground chamber that significantly predates much of the Vatican itself, perhaps part of a much older fortress or a remnant of the original Roman buildings that once stood on the site. One particular tale suggests the staircase ends at a massive door of solid stone, sealed so completely that even air cannot seem to pass through. Another insists it once opened into a hidden, walled-up library, closed when certain controversial texts were officially deemed too dangerous. The Vatican neither confirms nor denies these specific tales. On official tours, the sealed staircase is never mentioned, and visitors pass right by without ever realizing what lies just beyond the plain wooden door. If you were to stand directly before it, the air would noticeably feel cooler there, the faint scent of extreme age much stronger. The wood clearly shows marks as if it has been repaired numerous times. Yet it still conveys the impression of something left entirely untouched for longer than any living memory permits. Perhaps the staircase leads only to a few empty rooms, their stones damp and their ceilings low. Or perhaps it holds the kind of history that, once fully disclosed, would fundamentally alter the way the entire world views this place. In either outcome, the locked door remains, the steps beyond silent and unused, a powerful reminder that in the Vatican, not every potential path is meant to be taken. Leonardo da Vinci's final years were spent a great distance from Rome. Yet the ultimate fate of his last artistic projects and his most personal papers has long been a subject of intense speculation. When he passed away in 1519 in the French town of Amboise, he left behind a lifetime of accumulated sketches, intricate models and personal notes that spanned a lifetime of profound curiosity. Some pieces went to his dedicated students, others were given to his wealthy patrons, but a substantial number simply disappeared entirely. In the centuries that have followed, fragments of his work have continuously surfaced in extremely unexpected locations. A large folio found in a private noble library, a single isolated sketch tucked into the binding of an entirely different book, a fragment of a complex mechanical design discovered among old estate papers. Yet persistent rumours maintain that some of his most unusual and radical writings never actually left Italy at all. According to one thread of this particular story, certain notebooks were taken from his specific Roman period, containing observational notes made during his time under papal patronage. These, it is said, found their way into the Vatican's custody, not as formal official acquisitions, but as quiet, sensitive deposits made by those individuals who considered the contents too delicate for wider circulation. If this is true, these volumes could contain anything from detailed architectural studies of the Vatican itself to coded reflections on the nature of faith and science. Leonardo was an individual who frequently concealed his most controversial ideas in careful mirror writing, visible only when read in a reflection. It is easy to imagine that if these concepts touched upon sensitive theological matters, they might have been quietly set aside for a more cautious future age. Over time, these rumoured works have developed a life of their own, becoming an integral part of the grand mystery surrounding the Vatican's immense archives. Whether they are meticulously preserved in a clearly labelled box or hidden in plain view among unrelated historical manuscripts, their actual existence remains unproven. What is absolutely certain is that Leonardo's unique genius was not restricted to the great works we observe in museums today. The fragments that do remain strongly suggest a mind that ventured far beyond the established limits of his era. If the Vatican truly holds some of his final unrevealed creations, they would be much more than mere relics of art. They would be crucial keys to fully understanding the innermost thoughts of a man who stood at the absolute crossroads of science, artistic beauty, and core belief. And until they are definitively found, if they exist at all, the story of Leonardo's last works will remain one more unanswered question. In the long corridor of Vatican secrets across Italy, in small, quiet churches and remote, isolated monasteries, there are numerous relics, each claimed to be the legendary Holy Grail. Most are simple cups, ornate chalices, or small fragments of vessels, each with its own complex story tracing its history back through the centuries. Some are lavishly adorned with gold and precious jewels. Others are plain and completely unremarkable, as if their true importance lies not in their beauty, but in their profound history. One of the most famous claimants is currently kept in the Cathedral of Valencia in Spain, said to have been transported there originally from Rome. Another resides in a tiny church in Genoa, a carved green vessel that some historians believe is truly ancient glass. In central Italy, there are numerous lesser-known contenders: a silver cup in a hilltop chapel, a simple earthenware bowl in a remote monastery cloister. Each claimant maintains its own chain of dedicated guardians, historical documents, and specific traditions intended to confirm its authenticity. The Vatican has never officially acknowledged any single Grail as definitively the true one. Its long-standing position remains cautious, acknowledging the sincere devotion of the faithful without ever officially confirming the object's identity. This extremely careful stance intentionally leaves room for the mystery, and it is precisely in that space that the rich stories continue to multiply. Legends link some of these relics to secret, dangerous journeys during periods of widespread war when precious treasures of the Church were quickly hidden from invading armies. Other tales speak of the Grail being passed from hand to hand among various orders of knights, its resting place known only to a handful of people at any given time. Some extreme versions even suggest the Grail was never a single, fixed physical object, but rather a powerful symbol or a vessel for divine knowledge, appearing in different forms throughout recorded history. In the small towns where an acclaimed Grail currently rests, the general atmosphere can feel almost timeless. A visitor might enter the church on a quiet weekday afternoon, sunlight streaming through dusty windows, the air cool and completely still. The relic might be displayed in a glass-fronted case or resting on a shrouded altar covered in cloth, the priest or caretaker nearby watching with calm, steady eyes. Whether the cup resting before you once truly touched the lips of Christ or not, its presence undeniably carries a weight shaped as much by centuries of fervent belief as by actual history itself. If the Vatican does possess greater knowledge about the Grail's true origins or ultimate fate, it has chosen not to reveal it. Perhaps the truth is considered too highly uncertain, or perhaps it is simply considered more powerful as a persistent mystery than as a verifiable fact. And so the Grail remains, a story told in multiple voices, each version carefully guarded in its own way, its enduring meaning persisting, regardless of whether its true form is ever definitively located. Beneath the vast, sprawling streets of Rome lies a completely hidden world, an extensive network of catacombs carved deep into the earth long before the city became the official seat of the Catholic Church. These chilling underground corridors extend for many miles, their narrow walls lined with the resting places of the earliest Christians, their ceilings painted with powerful symbols that communicated in the silent language of faith and hope. Some of these particular symbols are simple: fish, doves, and anchors. Others are far more complex, echoing intricate designs that later found their way into famous Renaissance art, and even into the obscure theories woven through fictional works like the Da Vinci Code. Interlocking circles, specific shapes suggesting the Vesica Pisces, and highly stylized vines bearing fruit appear repeatedly, hinting at meanings that are simultaneously spiritual and mathematical. The catacombs served as much more than just burial sites. In times of violent persecution, they became secret meeting places, illuminated by small oil lamps whose flickering light danced over the painted walls. Here the faithful quietly shared scripture, offered prayers and took communion, far removed from the hostile eyes of state authorities. The unique art they left behind was both purely devotional and intensely protective, sometimes carrying secret messages that could only be deciphered by those who knew the specific code. In later centuries, some of these underground passages were deliberately sealed off, whether to ensure their preservation or to intentionally hide what was contained inside. Uncovered recently, these sites offered up layers of time previously undisturbed for more than 1,000 years. Scholars carefully recorded the frescoes, but a number of details remain unreleased, either because they are too deteriorated for study or because their meaning is simply still unknown. Walking the confines of these narrow pathways today gives one a genuine sense of history's presence. The air here is thick and cool, smelling of deep earth. Every single footfall resonates, and only the occasional sound of dripping water cuts through the quiet. Within certain chambers, the stone walls curve, forming small hidden spaces where faded artwork still hints at its true original colours. The question of whether these markings were simple demonstrations of faith or something much more complex continues to linger. If they do connect to later esoteric traditions or concealed knowledge, that connection is one the Vatican has not publicly acknowledged. The underground vaults guard their histories closely, keeping them in the darkness where the lines of actual history, popular legend, and true mystery merge in the deep stillness of the ground. Throughout the long history of those making the journey to Rome, most arrived with open piety, hoping to offer prayers at sacred sites and view the church's various treasures. Yet, among these countless travellers were a select few whose motivation was more intricate, their trips combining religious devotion with silent investigation. Some might have been called researchers, others simply spies. In the 17th and 18th centuries, foreign governments frequently sent trusted operatives to the Vatican under the pretext of pilgrimage. Formally, they paid visits to major churches, attended religious services, and held meetings with high-ranking clergy. Informally, they maintained meticulous accounts of what they observed, overheard, and perhaps even discovered in the most secluded parts of the city. The surviving diaries from such individuals describe private discussions with official archivists, brief sightings of exceedingly rare manuscripts, and guarded exchanges with members of the various religious orders. The language used is often deliberately vague, avoiding clear assertions, yet pointing toward insights not intended for general distribution. One visitor wrote of a gallery containing ancient maps, some of which depicted coastlines in a way only understood by mariners of the distant past. Another made a note of a small chapel where the wall paintings did not match the official records of their commission. Not all of these guests were adversaries. Some were merely seeking a particular form of knowledge, historical, theological, or artistic, that could not be found anywhere else. Others were ambitious to take home valuable relics or unique books for their own private holdings. Still, their presence deliberately blurred the distinction between religious duty and deep inquiry, a boundary the Vatican has always maintained with great vigilance. The city itself offered the ideal cover. Pilgrims arrived from every corner of the world, and one extra person in any given group drew very little notice. A secretive meeting in a room lit by candles, a quiet walk through a little-used side corridor, could easily pass unobserved amidst the ceaseless daily activity of thousands. Currently, those old reports are scattered across various public archives and private collections. They read as a combination of routine travelogue and cryptically written dispatch, providing fleeting insights into a Vatican that is both outwardly familiar and profoundly concealed. Whether these secret pilgrims truly unearthed anything of global importance is impossible to confirm. What remains undeniable is that the journey to Rome has consistently been far more than a simple act of faith. And for certain individuals, the road to the Holy City also served as a pathway to deep secrets, some of which were recorded in writing, and others taken home only as memories. The sun gradually descends over the city of Rome, washing the sky in rich shades of golden yellow and soft pink. Visitors begin to vacate St. Peter's Square, their footsteps gradually disappearing into the vast space. The atmosphere feels calmer now, enveloped by the stillness that inevitably settles when daylight yields to the night. In that widespread quiet, the very stones appear to be breathing. The immense marble plaza, so loud and active just a few hours prior, transforms into a dramatic canvas of shadow and collected memory. Somewhere far beneath the street level lie ancient chambers predating the Renaissance halls built long after. These spaces were here even before the first murmurings of the mysteries popularized in the Da Vinci Code were conceived. Deep in that underground realm, the air is much colder, the light is weaker, and the quiet is absolute. Those who have explored these passages often describe a deep sensation that they are not truly alone, even when no other living person is visible. Perhaps this feeling comes from the sheer weight of past centuries, or possibly it is something much deeper and more tangible. In this absolute stillness, the Vatican feels like a living, conscious entity. It carefully guards its secrets the way an aged storyteller protects the very last page of their narrative, revealing just enough to keep the audience completely captivated. It is right here, in this unique combination of deep shadow and ancient masonry, that the questions raised by the Da Vinci Code acquire a distinct resonance. They are not merely concepts in a novel or images in a motion picture. They are audible echoes reflecting off stone walls, subtly seeping into the minor crevices of historic doorways and dissolving into the dark depths below. To stand in St. Peter's Square at this time of day is to feel the closeness of profound hidden truths. The world above may seem entirely peaceful, but somewhere far underneath, behind incredibly thick walls and firmly locked doors, rests the other Vatican, the one that standard tourists are never permitted to see. That profoundly hidden domain is not listed on any map, yet it fundamentally shapes the essential character of this entire city-state. Some of its central truths are secured in carefully preserved historic documents, while others are found in complex symbols carved directly into the very structures. And possibly, as some have long theorized, a select few are cleverly concealed in the flowing folds of painted robes on a forgotten fresco, or veiled in the slight upward curve of a mouth on a centuries-old portrait. The Vatican is never quick to respond to these kinds of inquiries. Its continued silence is as deliberate and strategic as its overwhelming physical splendor. It understands that an enigma, once completely revealed, inevitably loses a crucial part of its power. And so the plaza remains serenely quiet. The grand basilica radiates a soft inner glow against the increasingly dark evening sky, and the immovable stones maintain their profound silence. Tonight we will explore not only the documented history, but also the intangible spaces where established history and compelling myth intersect. We will actively search for the precise lines that divide them, even as the Vatican appears determined to keep those very lines perpetually indistinct. On one particular evening many years ago, a traveller visiting Rome reported witnessing something genuinely unusual inside the Apostolic Palace. He had been allowed to visit a rarely seen gallery, accompanied by a soft-spoken cleric, who seemed to have no interest in making conversation. The room was illuminated by a few exceptionally tall candles, their light gently striking a series of wall paintings whose colours appeared to faintly shimmer in the dim atmosphere. But it was not the well-known paintings that captured his full attention. In the far corner of the room, mostly obscured behind a very heavy velvet drape, stood a large tapestry. Most tapestries in the Vatican tell explicit stories, clear biblical narratives, formal portraits of saints, or key moments from the Church's past. This specific one, however, was dominated by a single figure, a woman who seemed to project from the woven threads, as if she were suspended halfway between darkness and light. Her facial expression was impossible to decipher, her eyes looking subtly away. The symbols woven around her were unfamiliar. They were not associated with any recognized saint. Some patterns looked like blooming flowers, others like shining stars, and a few resembled the highly detailed loops and circles found in certain medieval volumes. At her feet, a book that was closed rested upon a decorated stone support, its cover etched with a mysterious design that the traveller could not recognize. When he attempted to ask about it, the cleric's answer was immediate and brief. "It is not currently on public display," he simply said, pulling the curtain back fully across the tapestry. The tour continued, but the traveller's thoughts did not move on. He could not remove the image of the woman in the tapestry from his mind, or the peculiar sense of quiet she seemed to impose upon the small room. Years later, scholars carefully reviewing the Vatican's extensive collection found absolutely no formal record of such a work existing. it had either been completely removed from official records or it had never been formally catalogued in the first place. Some researchers suspect it was a privately commissioned piece, a work intended to communicate a specific hidden message to a very restricted audience. Others question if it might have been linked to one of the numerous persistent legends surrounding Mary Magdalene or the powerful female figures of early Christianity, narratives that have always remained just outside the limits of accepted church history. Wherever it may be housed now, the memory of the tapestry has become part of the quiet catalogue of unspoken Vatican secrets. It is one of those objects that, should it still exist, could be in plain view without the majority of visitors ever recognising its true importance. And perhaps that is precisely where it is safest, remaining in the shadows, kept behind a curtain, revealing its meaning only to those who have already learned its particular language. Throughout the immense corridors of the Vatican, where all history is carefully showcased in large gold frames and sweeping marble halls, there are also countless formal records that have never been spoken of to the wider world. Some of these are papal bulls, which are the official formal edicts of the popes. Most of these are universally known, announcing the canonization of saints, formally establishing doctrine or granting specific entitlements. But a very small fraction are composed for a limited audience. They are sealed and delivered discreetly, their specific details never intended for the public's understanding. These confidential instructions might concern the correct way to safeguard certain relics, the necessary movement of specific sensitive manuscripts, or the discreet management of complex political matters. Occasionally they take the form of detailed instructions to construct or subtly modify a chapel with such minute specifications that even the precise positioning of a single piece of stone is formally determined. At other times they carry formal requests for immediate investigations into certain teachings or new writings that have caused alarm. A handful of historians have managed to catch a quick glimpse of these concealed decrees within the depths of the archives. They describe long scrolls of high-quality parchment, the ink still vividly dark after many centuries, each bearing the heavy, distinctive lead seal of the Pope who personally authorized them. The phrasing is always very guarded, highly formal, and at times so profoundly indirect that its true central meaning is almost impossible to grasp. Without full knowledge of the exact context in which it was composed, one unverified narrative recounts a papal instruction concerning a painting commissioned for a specific side chapel during the late Renaissance period. According to the tale, the formal decree directed the artist to implement very subtle revisions to the work, altering the posture of a central figure and discreetly removing a minor symbolic object from the deep background. The official justification was never formally noted, and the painting, as it is displayed today, holds no discernible trace of what might once have been included. Whether they address matters of fine art, spiritual relics, or sensitive issues of state, these undisclosed official orders are part of a long-standing tradition that values complete discretion as highly as it values absolute authority. They guarantee that certain important actions are undertaken without attracting the unwanted attention of the curious, and that some essential truths remain strictly within the small circle of those who have been specially chosen to know them. Somewhere deep within the physical core of the Vatican Library, safely locked behind guarded reading room doors and heavy cabinets, these ancient papal bulls continue to be preserved. The scrolls remain sealed, their binding intact, the writings held in waiting for the chance, if it ever presents itself, to be brought into the light and deciphered once more. Within the private documentation hidden deep inside the Vatican's vaults, a long-serving cardinal's journal is rumoured to exist, detailing his experience across numerous papal terms. This individual was someone entrusted with sensitive diplomatic matters, recognised for his composed demeanour and measured language. His public life appeared to be a steady path of duty. However, his private entries imply he witnessed decisions and occurrences seldom recorded in formal history. The journal, according to those who claim to have accessed it, is not an elaborate manuscript. It is covered in dark hide, its pages densely covered in careful penmanship using brown ink. The earliest notations are simply routine appointments attended, sermons given, and holidays observed. But over the span of the years, the narrative voice shifts. The cardinal starts documenting instances when critical choices were made privately, when sacred items were silently moved between rooms, or when paperwork was permanently sealed with no public justification. One segment recounts an evening when he was called to a modest chapel past midnight. There, illuminated by 2 faint flames, he stood beside the Pope and a small group of others as a container was placed beneath the main altar. Its contents were undisclosed, yet the atmosphere in the room was intense, as if everyone present understood the deep significance of the action. Another entry discusses a collection of ancient papers brought by a visitor from the Middle East, inspected briefly, and then secured within a locked cabinet where, as the journal states, they would rest indefinitely as the Lord sees fit. The document does not explicitly fault or denounce anyone. It is the record of a man who observed much and commented little, a figure who grasped that the Church often follows paths hidden from the general congregation. If the Vatican maintains possession of this diary, it is likely preserved under the same strict conditions as its most cherished writings. Perhaps it stays there because it contains nothing the Church considers damaging. Or possibly it is there because it contains too much raw truth for the world to currently process. In either scenario, the thought of such a record, one individual's silent testimony to the unseen mechanisms of the Holy See, reminds us that history is not solely contained in major decrees. Sometimes it resides within the personal notes of those who stood close enough to observe what others could not. In a remote section of the Vatican, there is a chapel that is never included on public itineraries. Its entry is plain, lacking a marker or decoration, and it's perpetually secured. Those familiar with it refer to it as the altar that is never used. The chapel is modest in size compared to the grand halls most tourists visit. Inside, the walls are lined with pale stone, smoothed by the passage of time. At the far wall sits an altar of black marble, its surface shiny but bare. There are no holders for candles, no cloth covering, no evidence of recent prayer. The air is motionless, holding a faint trace of very old incense that has long since dissipated. Some suggest the chapel was once used for private worship by popes during periods of grave uncertainty. Others believe it was set aside for rituals known only to a select few, rites that have not been practiced or mentioned for generations. A less dramatic explanation suggests it was closed after structural issues rendered it unsafe for larger gatherings. Still, the area is flawlessly cared for, dust never accumulates, and the stone floor shows no signs of neglect. Certain features provoke curiosity. A narrow window, positioned unusually high, permits a ray of sun to hit the altar on one specific date annually. Engravings in the marble base of the altar appear to show scenes from religious texts, but they are too faded for their full message to be clear. In one recess of the room, a small metal-banded chest rests against the wall, though whether it is holding anything or simply stored there is unknown. The Vatican has never provided an official statement regarding the chapel's closure. It is not shown on any tourist maps, and few people are aware of its presence. Yet those who have been inside describe a shared experience, a feeling of being in a location intended for a particular function, one that ceased without notice, leaving behind only the space and its quiet purpose. Whatever that purpose was, the altar remains untouched, the chapel locked, and its narrative neatly folded into the layers of history the Vatican maintains in stone and silence. There have been rare times in the Vatican's past when the bells marking the hours have fallen quiet. These bells are more than tools for measuring time. They are the city's voice, their echoes travelling across rooftops, signalling worship, celebration or sorrow. Their regular pulse is so constant that when it stops, the silence is felt like a moment of held breath. Historical records mention such lapses during moments of deep grief, such as the death of a pope and the period between his passing and the election of the next successor. But there are other cases, less clearly documented periods when the ringing simply stopped. For reasons never publicly disclosed, one such instance occurred in the late 1800s. For 3 entire days, the bells of St. Peter's remained quiet. Official statements mentioned only necessary repairs. Yet the timing coincided with private talk of a secret meeting within the Apostolic Palace. What was discussed in those rooms has never been revealed, but some speculate it concerned decisions regarding disputed sacred artifacts brought in from foreign lands. Another unexplained silence happened in the mid-1900s during an otherwise uneventful week in spring. There was no religious holiday, no crisis visible to the world outside. The bells went silent, and for 2 days the air above the square carried only the gentle sound of the fountains and the movement of shoes on the paving stones. Then, just as abruptly as they had stopped, the chimes began again, ringing as if nothing had happened. For both local residents and visitors, these silences prompt speculation. Were they genuinely for repairs, as occasionally asserted? Or were they deliberate signals, pauses meant to observe moments that could not be announced openly? The Vatican offers no clarifications, and perhaps it never will. Yet those who have spent time near its perimeter will tell you the bells are like a living heart. When that heart misses a beat, even briefly, you notice the change. And in a place where tradition spans centuries, such interruptions are rarely meaningless even if the underlying reason remains concealed. Leonardo da Vinci's brilliance extended beyond his artwork and anatomical sketches. His detailed notebooks reveal an enduring fascination with mechanisms, engineering, and the underlying laws that govern their operation. In certain designs, academics have observed measurements and formations that mirror the sacred geometry utilized in church construction. Throughout his career, Leonardo explored how circles, triangles, and squares could be combined to achieve both artistic merit and structural integrity. These shapes were not only functional, they also held symbolic importance in religious art and construction. Ratios found in his plans for bridges and mechanical devices appear remarkably similar to those that dictate the floor plan of cathedrals and grand churches. Whether this was purposeful or simply the result of a mind inherently drawn to balance remains an open inquiry. Some researchers hypothesize that Leonardo may have embedded specific principles within his engineering blueprints, proportions equally applicable to the design of a religious altar or a complicated lifting crane. Others view his output as a reflection of the broader Renaissance mindset, where disciplines like science, creativity, and spirituality were intertwined in ways that seem foreign today. There is a subtle theory that a few of Leonardo's designs were examined inside the Vatican, not just for their artistic merit, but for the mathematical knowledge they contained. This knowledge could have been adopted into architecture, enabling structures to serve as quiet symbols of the structure and harmony believed to reflect divine intent. Whether or not this influence was deliberately applied, it is clear that Leonardo's mastery of form and dimension crossed various fields. His complex machines, even those never physically constructed, possess the same grace as his famous paintings. His preoccupation with geometry allowed him to communicate in a visual language understood by both construction experts and theologians. If the Vatican is preserving any of his engineering plans that have not yet been made public, they are likely housed in the same secured archives as his missing drawings and notes. And like so many aspects linked to Leonardo, they would blur the distinction between practical invention and philosophical concept, between the physical workings of the material world and the deeper mysteries of faith. In the Vatican's extensive holdings, there are sacred objects that inspire deep faith and others that provoke strong disagreement. Some of the most contentious are those claimed by multiple religious bodies or sovereign nations. These items, often hundreds of years old, carry complex histories interwoven with faith, folklore, and political manoeuvring. One such disputed item is a wood fragment said to originate from the original cross. Several religious organizations across Europe maintain they possess pieces of it, each presenting historical documents and long-standing traditions to validate their claim. Another is a piece of linen bearing an imprint some believe to be miraculous. Yet similar artifacts are exhibited in other cities, each possessing its own account of origin. When conflicts arise, the Vatican rarely issues a public ruling. Instead, it maintains a neutral position, allowing reverence to continue without officially validating one artifact as authentic and dismissing another as false. This neutrality is sometimes interpreted as prudence, but it might also be a method of safeguarding the unity of the faithful. Behind the scenes, however, these matters are thoroughly investigated. Specialists analyse the construction, the material composition, and the documented ownership history. In certain instances, the results of these studies are retained internally by the Church, known only to those responsible for the custody of the relics. In other cases, items are moved to secured storage or archives, taken out of public view without further comment. These disagreements are not always centred solely on verifying authenticity. They can also involve questions of legitimate possession, especially when relics were transported across international borders during periods of conflict or political instability. Returning a relic can help strengthen ties between different groups, but it can also raise difficult questions about how it was originally acquired. For believers, the significance of a sacred object often lies as much in its function as a focus for devotion as it does in its historical certainty. And perhaps the Vatican understands that some fundamental questions are best left unresolved, their true answers residing in the quiet space between religious conviction and hard facts. In that ambiguous space, a relic becomes more than just an old object. It can function as a connection across centuries, fostering belief even if every detail of its past is not entirely known. There are reports of meetings held inside the Vatican that are never listed on any official calendar. They happen in private chambers, usually after sunset, with only a small number of trusted advisors present. These interactions focus not on contemporary politics or public happenings, but on historical material, fragments of the past kept intentionally out of sight. One account describes a night when a prominent scholar was guided through a discreet doorway and into the apostolic palace. He was led to a small space, its walls lined with shelving, each tier supporting containers labelled solely with dates. A senior cleric was waiting for him there, and the two proceeded to inspect an old document, supposedly written before the oldest known versions of specific early Christian literature. Their discussion continued for several hours, but the historian departed with nothing concrete, only his recollection. Another anecdote concerns an archaeologist who was presented with a collection of relics unearthed during an excavation beneath the city. These artifacts, wrapped in linen and kept inside cedar containers, displayed symbols he had never encountered. He was allowed a short period to analyse them, making notes by hand, yet those annotations were retrieved before his exit. Such consultations seem to adhere to a distinct procedure. The specialist is selected with care, escorted in secrecy, and granted just enough observation to confirm the object's significance, but never enough to fully assess its properties. Often the material displayed is linked to long-standing theological or historical debates. Whether these private meetings are intended to solicit outside judgment or merely gauge a scholar's reaction is still ambiguous. What remains clear is the Holy See's total command over the encounter. The items are returned to their designated spots within the archives, and the visitor leaves with confidential information they cannot divulge without risking their reputation due to the complete lack of verifiable evidence. This method permits the Vatican to safeguard its most sensitive possessions, both famous and obscure, glimpsed by a few, yet hidden from everyone else. It is a policy that maintains the inherent mystery while guaranteeing that the full chronicle of these artifacts continues, for the moment, unrecorded. There is a specific narrative, often exchanged quietly among individuals who have served within the Vatican's deepest repositories, concerning a sacred object that resides in the archives without any formal identification. It is housed in a simple wooden container, entirely plain save for a small assigned inventory number. No public document exists to clarify its origins. The artifact itself is seldom detailed with precision. Some claim it is a broken piece of carved stone, its surface engraved with marks that correlate to no known writing system. Others believe it is a metallic fragment, strangely light for its mass, with a subtle texture visible only when exposed to particular light. Regardless of its nature, those who have viewed it agree on a key point. It bears no resemblance to the typical sacred items maintained by the Church. Its inclusion in the Vatican's holdings is documented by only one line in an official register, penned in meticulous Latin, recording the date it was placed into storage, but offering no information on who delivered it or why. The script suggests the inscription was made in the latter part of the 19th century, though the relic itself may be considerably older. Occasionally, it is rumoured that the object is taken out for examination. A small group of scholars and archivists reviews it under strict surveillance, compiling observations that are then stored in secure cabinets. No images are authorised, and no formal statement is issued. Following the review, it is returned to its case, where it settles back into quiet isolation. Why such rigorous security is afforded to an item the public is not even aware of remains a puzzle. Perhaps it is too specialised to warrant interest outside of academic specialisation. Or perhaps its underlying importance would provoke inquiries the Vatican is currently unwilling to address. Ultimately, the unnamed relic remains precisely what it has always been. An object without an accessible narrative, at least one the world can hear. It stays concealed in the darkness, its true meaning understood solely by the select few who hold the requisite clearances, another silent element in the complex arrangement of secrets interwoven through the heart of the Holy See. Among the many people who have served in the Swiss Guard, the majority finish their commitment and return to normal life without ever publicly disclosing their experiences. However, there is one particular story often repeated in guarded conversations about a guard who made an exception to that silence only once. He performed his service during the late 20th century, a period of both fundamental stability and gradual evolution within the Vatican. His assignment frequently placed him in sectors of the Apostolic Palace that are inaccessible to visitors. These included poorly lit flights of stairs, restricted hallways, and private places of worship where the very atmosphere felt older than the structure itself. He was known for being disciplined, respectful, and not prone to unnecessary conversation. Years following his departure from duty, during a simple discussion with a colleague, he mentioned a specific evening when he received orders to accompany a visiting cleric through a series of locked chambers. The assigned path led them deep into a sector he had never previously entered. At the conclusion of a confined passageway, they encountered a massive door, watched by another guard dressed in ordinary robes. Security keys were exchanged, the mechanism was turned, and the door revealed a small circular room. Inside, illuminated by a single dim lamp, was a surface draped in dark cloth. Upon it rested a container made of carved wood, its top inlaid with a motif the guard could not identify. The visiting cleric knelt quietly before the container, spoke briefly in a foreign tongue the guard didn't recognise, and then signed a paper presented to him by the robed attendant. The container was secured, the lamp switched off, and they went back the way they came without exchanging another word. The guard never encountered the room again, nor was it ever referenced in any official communication. When he was later asked what he believed the container held, he offered only a slight smile and responded, "Some things are simply not for us to comprehend." It was the sole instance he ever discussed the event, and he never revisited the subject. Whether his account was pure recollection or a subtle embellishment, it has integrated itself into the private folklore surrounding the Vatican, serving as a reminder that even the individuals tasked with guarding its boundaries may only catch brief glimpses of the vast array of secrets within. Beneath the imposing architecture of St. Peter's Basilica lies a layered record of construction where each successive era built upon the foundations left by the previous one. Scholars who have been permitted entry to these lower elevations describe the experience as literally navigating through different periods of time. The descent commences in softly illuminated corridors, where the polished marble flooring eventually transitions into much older stone walkways, eroded smooth by millennia of foot traffic. Along the retaining walls are small burial chapels and grave markers, some engraved with Latin epitaphs, others bearing symbols whose meaning has now been lost. The air is consistently cool and carries the distinct smell of wet stone, a constant indication of the nearby Tiber River. Further down still, one reaches the grottos, where the remains of popes from past centuries lie within ornate sarcophagi. Here, the union of devotion and history is palpable and immediate. Visitors proceed with caution, their conversations kept to whispers, as if in the presence of something profoundly spiritual. Yet, even this area does not represent the deepest point of the structure. Beyond a specific set of secured access points lies the Vatican necropolis, an entire settlement of tombs that predates the basilica itself. In the early part of the 20th century, extensive archaeological digs revealed ancient mausoleums decorated richly with frescoes and mosaics. Among these structures is the site generally accepted to hold the bodily remains of St. Peter. Entrance to this precise area is strictly controlled, and only a tiny number of approved visitors each year are granted permission to traverse its confined walkways. The accumulation of history here is more than just structural. Pagan grave sites are situated beneath early Christian sanctuaries, and in various locations, masonry from the original buildings was reused in the later ones. Every successive addition was incorporated with a specific goal in mind. But when taken as a whole, they form a silent, continuous record, a ledger of authority and faith inscribed into the very stone and brick. To be present in these buried chambers is to sense 2 millennia weighing down from every direction. The basilica overhead shines with brilliance and gold, but in this deep space the history lives in the gloom. And within this gloom, the Vatican holds a portion of its most profound past unaltered, untold, and settled silently beneath the central devotion of the Church. Long before the great ceiling of St. Peter's stood tall over the city of Rome, the earth beneath the Vatican Hill sheltered a different community. This was the burial ground of the Roman Empire, a district of memorials and graves where the influential and wealthy found their final rest. The territory came to be known as Constantine's Plateau only ages later, after the initial Christian emperor selected it as the spot for his vast church. In the early 4th century, Constantine commissioned the building of a sanctuary to honour the Apostle Peter. Constructing it on this incline required burying much of the necropolis, an effort that involved levelling and backfilling the whole expanse. Entire family tombs were sealed completely, their entrances closed forever. For the engineers, this was not damage, but renewal, transforming a city for the dead into a centre of prayer and pilgrimage. For countless years the world above flourished, while the tombs below stayed undisturbed. Layers of belief, soil, and stone pressed downward, conserving them in perpetual night. It was only in the 20th century, during private digs authorised by Pope Pius V, that historians started to uncover what lay below. They discovered floors made of mosaic, still vivid, walls painted with Roman gods, and carvings dedicated to loved ones long since forgotten. The contrast was startling. Pagan artwork existing directly beneath the main altar of one of the Christian world's most sacred places. In one sense, it was a reminder of how time accumulates, each era reshaping what came before it. In another, it sparked quiet curiosity. What else might remain concealed beneath the basilica, sealed away in the name of piety and progress? Today, the ancient burial ground is carefully kept, accessible only to a limited number of guests daily. Those who navigate its tight passageways find themselves caught between two realities, where Roman marble meets Christian faith and the sounds of empire echo below the pleas of travellers. It is here, under Constantine's plateau, that the foundation of the Vatican rests, not just in architecture, but in the interwoven history of belief, authority, and the passing of time within the Vatican's walls. Some of the oldest materials share a history more ancient than Christianity itself. When the first great churches were built here, the workers made use of resources that were easily at hand, and this meant repurposing materials from public works, forums, and temples of ancient Rome. If one looks closely in certain obscure corners, you can still observe signs of this older time. A column base may bear the faded relief of a pagan god, its details obscured but still recognizable. Marble blocks show the marks of tools in styles no longer practiced, their surfaces smooth to integrate with newer stonework. In a few small churches, the risers are fashioned from slabs that once formed the pavements of imperial structures. For the nascent church, this act of reuse was both symbolic and practical. It was a method to claim the strength of Rome for the worship of God, to change what once honoured multiple deities into buildings dedicated to a single one. But in the still areas beneath the basilica, where the light penetrates only in narrow rays, these pieces of stone feel like silent observers to a deeper history. Some experts propose the placement of certain stones was intentional, preserving fragments of the past in locations where only a few would notice them. Others argue it was simply the most efficient method of construction, with meaning and symbolism added only in later centuries. Regardless, the outcome is a building layered not only with devotion, but with the collective memory of a powerful empire. To move through these spaces is to travel between worlds, one that honoured Mars and Jupiter, and one that honours Christ and the holy figures. The stones hold both narratives, their surfaces bearing the weight of prayers, foot traffic, and formal processions from 2,000 years ago up to the present day. In these hidden walls, Christian Rome and pagan Rome are forever linked, each influencing the other, both remaining present in the quiet spirit of the Vatican. The designers of the Vatican have always understood the impact of light. Sunlight is not simply a tool to brighten a room here. It forms part of the structure's vocabulary, a silent language that communicates through golden streaks and shades. In certain chapels, the light of the morning sun lands in such a way that it illuminates only one specific altar on a certain holy day. In others, a thin shaft of light will enter through a small opening to rest upon a statue or mosaic for a brief interval before disappearing. These moments are not accidental. They are the product of deliberate planning where geometry, faith, and celestial motion converge. During the Renaissance period, designers such as Michelangelo and Bramante worked with a clear sense of how light could direct the soul and the eye. They calculated how the sun's route shifted throughout the seasons, aligning arches, windows, and domes to create subtle moments of divine exposure. Even the passing of clouds can play a part, softening light at certain times to focus attention on a single figure in a painting, or to bathe a holy container in a radiance that seems almost alive. Some suggest that beyond their beauty, these designs contained profound meaning. A ray of light might indicate a sacred day or trace a connection between two areas of the basilica that are related by theology or history. For those who possessed the knowledge to read these patterns, the structure itself became a map of faith and a calendar. Visitors may not consciously note all these arrangements, but they experience them. The way the light shines can bring about a feeling of awe, peace, or mystery, even if the reason remains unclear. It is as though the stone and the sunlight are engaged in a silent dialogue, one that has been ongoing for centuries. In this sense, the Vatican is more than just a place of prayer and art, but a place where light itself serves as a piece of the architecture, a messenger that travels silently through the day, carrying messages only a few will ever truly perceive. There is an old story among Vatican historians of a document that was never intended to be recovered. It was discovered not because someone went looking for it, but because it had been hidden deep inside the covering of another book. The volume on the outside was a typical theological study from the 17th century, bound in thick hide with letters stamped in gold on the spine. When the volume was submitted for restoration work, the expert binder carefully loosened the covering and found, pressed flat between the two boards, a stack of paper folded over. The script was older than the printed words, the ink faded yet readable. The concealed manuscript shared a narrative unlike anything found in the main book. It appeared to be a report, or perhaps a letter, describing an artifact brought to Rome many centuries prior. The author wrote of peculiar symbols on its surface and of a council of church officials who debated whether to conceal it or to put it on display. There was no name, only a date, written in the style of the late medieval period. Once removed, the pages were quietly transferred to the archives. The repaired book was returned to its place on the library shelf, appearing no different than before. No public statement was issued, and the secret pages were placed in a protected cabinet available only to a handful of people. It is not known whether the artifact detailed in the manuscript still exists, or if it can be identified among the numerous holy objects kept in the Vatican. Perhaps the manuscript was a small part of a much larger record, or perhaps it represents the only surviving record of something now completely lost to history. What remains clear is that for hundreds of years it lay unnoticed within the binding of a book, its words unheard until the moment, chance or fate brought them into the open. And now, like many things unearthed in the Vatican, it remains in secure storage, its complete account understood only by those who possess the means to access it. Among the more unusual tales whispered about the Vatican is the legend of the chronovisor, a device supposedly allowing the user to observe moments from the past. The story first emerged in the mid-20th century, when a Benedictine priest claimed that a small group within the church had created such a device using ancient principles and modern technology. According to this narrative, the chronovisor was not a way to transport people through time, but rather a kind of visual display or screen that could pick up sounds and images from history. The monk reported witnessing scenes from biblical periods, including moments from the life of Christ, as if watching a remote presentation. The Vatican never acknowledged the story, and official spokesmen rejected it as pure fiction. Yet the specifics provided by the monk were unusually precise. He mentioned antennae made from rare minerals, of complex arrangements of crystals and lenses, and of the requirement for precise spatial and temporal coordinates to capture the images. Skeptics have consistently noted that no physical evidence of such an apparatus has ever been presented. Still, the myth endures, fueled by the suggestion that if the Church had physical proof of certain historical events, it might choose to keep that information private. The sheer idea of viewing the past with one's own eyes raises profound questions of interpretation, history, and faith, questions that might destabilize generations of accepted doctrine. Whether the chronovisor is a pure fantasy, a misunderstood scientific trial, or something else entirely, it fits perfectly into the long tradition of enigmas linked to the Vatican. Like so many stories tied to its reputation, it provides just enough convincing detail to inspire the imagination, yet never enough definitive proof to confirm the reality. And in the quiet halls of the historical records where the deepest secrets rest, there is always space for yet another mystery.